Hello and welcome everybody to episode 2 of my Grim Dawn Basics video, where I'm gonna show you all the classes and all the skills and tell you which of these are damage skills, which of them are debuff skills, which of them are passives and so on, and also showcase you at the very least all the active skills. So let us start out with the first mastery, the Soldier. The Soldier has the following active abilities that can be used as main damage abilities. First of all, it has a very basic ability called Cadence. Cadence is a so-called default attack replacer, meaning you can put it on your bar instead of your default attack, and it will more or less do everything that a default attack can. Which means it can, for example, proc weapon pool skills. Weapon pool skills are skills that proc off of your default attacks on top of your normal attack, basically, which will have special animations and deal additional damage. Soldier has two of those, called Markovian's Advantage and Zolahan's Technique. With only like 1 point here, they have like a pretty minuscule chance to proc, but if you would put more points into them, then they will have a higher chance to proc. The thing is, Cadence as well is a very special default attack replacer. Cadence, every third hit of Cadence will be a magnified strike. So the entire damage that you're seeing on the Cadence skill itself here on the first node, as well as on the second node, the bleeding damage as well as the percent increased damage and the like multiple targets and so on, like all of this damage is only applying to the third hit, right? The first and second hit are just completely standard 100% weapon damage based default attacks that get none of this extra damage, neither from this nor from this. Deadly Momentum, however, is a buff that lingers after your third hit. So you get this icon when you are about to proc your Cadence next, and then once you hit your Cadence, you get this icon, Deadly Momentum. And Deadly Momentum is a buff to your character that will apply to everything, including your first and second attack. So this added physical and internal trauma, as well as all the percent damage, will also work for pretty much any other attack that you're using. The flat damage, the physical and internal trauma, the non-percent damage part, these are weapon damage, basically, so they will only apply to skills that have percent weapon damage. Well, because of Cadence always proccing on the third strike, the problem now is that, well, like the small deviation here is that Cadence actually always overrides other weapon pool skills. So weapon pool skills can only be procced by the first and the second hit of Cadence, but the third hit, the actual Cadence hit, will always override other weapon pool skills and only, well, proc the Cadence itself. If I check out the animations here again real quick, the Markovian's Advantage and the Zolahan's Technique do have special animations. However, the Soldier animations are very basic, like this is one of them, and this is the Cadence one, and then this is the other one. This was the one that like hits multiple targets, so this was Zolahan's Technique, and I think the one that first procced was Markovian's Advantage. So this is Zolahan's, this is Cadence, this is default attack, this is Cadence, this is Markovian's Advantage. Yeah. That's how Cadence and weapon pool skills work. Honestly, this was probably the most complicated skill in all of Soldier. Everything else is going to be a little bit easier. So next up we have Force Wave. Force Wave, widely known as the no-brainer skill, is a medium-ranged ability that uses weapon damage as well as some other like physical damage, and then more physical damage, and then internal trauma and bleeding damage down here. The one thing that you have to know about Cadence is, if you're playing cooldown Cadence, it doesn't matter that much, but if you're using this Tremor Transmuter, which only works with a two-hander, right? Cadence itself, I mean Force Wave rather, works with a two-hander or with a shield, and Tremor only works with a two-hander. So if you now spam Force Wave, you might think, because this is a weapon damage ability, it should scale with attack speed, right? It does not, it scales with casting speed actually, which is very weird for Soldier to have a casting speed scaled skill, but that's like pretty much the only thing you have to know about the skill. Otherwise the skill is very self-explanatory, can be used as a great leveling skill with a two-hander, and with proper itemization later on should like pretty much do all the content as well. However, in the actual end game, I mean it's still okay, but there are some other skills that are a bit more performative for actual end game. But I mean it's so great for early and mid game already, and also pretty decent for endgame. Like you can still do all content, it's just gonna be like maybe not quite as great as like with some other skills. So yeah, Force Wave, one of the like no-brainer skills in Soldier. Then we have Blade Arc. Blade Arc is basically a melee attack, a melee swing attack, like this. But it is not a default attack replacer, so it does not proc Zolhan's Technique or Makomi's Advantage. Also, like these cannot be proc by Force Wave, of course. And yeah, also not by Blade Arc. Blade Arc, well, has some like just main hand damage and bleeding damage here, and then lots of like flat physical damage as well as internal trauma damage on Laceration. Blade Arc is very often used as a dot skill as well, together with Clean Sweep. So like on the contrary to Force Wave, which is cooldown by default and then like removes the cooldown with the transmitter, like with this crystal. Blade Arc works the other way around, right? It's spam by default, and if you want it to be like a nuke ability, you can take this transmitter and then, well, it still looks the same, but it has a cooldown and will do like a lot more damage. And especially the total damage modified, which is a multiplicative scalar, is really great to scale the dot, like the bleeding damage as well as the internal trauma damage, which is physical damage over time. Similar to Force Wave, I would say not quite as brain dead to play and takes a tiny bit longer to work for leveling, but there are really good monster frequents, so like items that you can target farm while leveling in the game for Blade Arc 2, so Blade Arc is also a great leveling skill, and Blade Arc is arguably a little bit better for endgame than Force Wave. So these 1, 2, 3 skills are basically like the 3 main abilities usually for soldiers that you can choose. Usually you play like either one of the 3, sometimes you can combine like some of them as well. And then the 4th active damaging skill is Blitz. Now Blitz is a charge ability that requires a target, so you cannot like target the ground, you cannot like jump around like with evade, for example. You always need a target. However, due to the nature of these like targetable like movement skills in Grim Dawn, you can sometimes with camera rotation do some pretty funky stuff, like for example charge all the way around like this. So knowing how to camera abuse, or like to use the camera to advantage rather, can be pretty beneficial for the skill to like make you zoom around the map even quicker. You can max out Blitz as well. It is a decent damaging ability, especially for like single target, but of course also because of the 8 target maximum and like the pretty big degree arc, it can have like a pretty like good damage in a small-ish area, so like if enemies group up around you properly, then this is still a really good ability. And there are some builds that can use Blitz in combination with either Cadence or, for example, another default attack replacer from Oathkeeper, Righteous Fervor. Those builds can make like pretty good so-called Blitz builds as well, so you can actually also use Blitz as one of your main abilities. It's just not quite as easy to make it work than the others maybe. However, there are on the other hand also already items in Act 1, like the shield from the Act 1 final boss, as well as a helmet from like a mini boss that you get way earlier in the Act 1 already, are great for Blitz, so there is pretty good Blitz support. If you want to play Blitz though, you probably want to play it with a shield. Because Blitz, I mean, it works with all your weapons as long as it's a melee weapon. So they can use it with dual wield melee, with one hand and shield, or with a two-hander. However, or like with one-handed offhand as well actually. However, the shield damage actually gets added to the skill, so it's pretty good with a shield as well. So most people when they play a full Blitz build, they mostly play one-handed shield, but there are also some like two-handed Blitz builds, but not quite as popular. Alright, one more active button that we can press in this skill, this class rather, is Warcry. So Warcry serves as your like kind of like debuff ability. The one issue with Warcry that I have personally is that the sound of Warcry is more like a than an actual cry. Like compared to Berserker's bone-chilling cry, which you will hear later, this skill does sound rather underwhelming. I wish they would update the sound, but hey, it is what it is. So what does Warcry do? Warcry does reduce enemy health by 33%. Now you might think that's like insane for damage, right? Well, the thing is like it only works against trash, so bosses are literally immune to this, so it's kind of a bait. The reason why you use this skill is for the damage reduction, that up to 25% reduce target's damage for 5 seconds, so as long as you press this, like ideally every 5 seconds, by default the cooldown is 7.5 seconds, but there are some items that like reduce the cooldown. you will have like a permanent 25% damage reduction because you are debuffing all of your enemies around you. Like if you put more points, also the radius gets bigger, as you can see, right? You get like 16 meter radius here, so now this is a lot bigger than before. Yeah, it's pretty good for a debuff. And also if you're playing physical damage, Break Morale reduces enemy physical resistance on top, which is also really, really nice. If you're not playing physical damage, you can also take Terrify. 3 points in Terrify reduce enemy resistances by 21, no matter what kind of damage type you're doing. And 21 is like kind of good enough. There are some other debuffs that have like a higher value for this type of resistance reduction, so it's not always used, but it can be decent. It can be used and it is kind of okay. For physical though, Break Morale is insane, and even if you're not playing physical, always taking 1 point in Break Morale can be okay just for the disruption. The disruption of enemy skills for 3 seconds can be okay. Many bosses, of course, are also resistant to this, but like just putting 1 point to make this work against the elites or like the heroes, where it does work against at least, can be kind of nice sometimes. The Warcry cannot really be used as a main ability. It is just a debuff ability. There are some items that like give you some damage to Warcry, but it's kind of always like gonna be just a supportive skill together with other skills. There is one skill though that is, well, just proccing when you're getting hit, called Counter-Strike. And Counter-Strike has a higher chance of activating the more points you put into it as well. And Counter-Strike, at least for a so-called retaliation build, like a Thorns build basically, can be actually a significant part of your damage. I would almost dare to say, like, for some builds it can be like your main damage source even. He's not even hitting me. Oh, there we go. Like this effect here was the Counter-Strike effect. So yeah, it has pretty decent like AoE around your character at least. I mean, if you're playing a Thorns build, that is kind of decent. Like it's pretty good. It can be like ridiculously good actually, because the cooldown on it can be very low, and if you're getting hit a lot, then you're gonna like proc it like crazy. Next up, we have some more passives. So first of all, we have an aura. Like this looks like an active skill, like the squares usually are actives and the circles are like passives. But this is an aura, and auras now will be automatically activated. Counter-Strike is actually also an aura basically. You will see auras down here in the bottom left. Field Command gives you offensive and defensive ability as well as armor, and Squad Tactics, the modifier for it, gives you also some percent damage as well as attack speed and casting speed, and usually every single soldier uses this ability. How many points you put on these kind of depends on the build, but usually getting these at least to like 12 points is pretty good later on. You don't want to like max them out right away, because usually you want to like cap out your main ability or your exclusives first and stuff like that, but eventually you want to get like these pretty high as well. There's one more skill actually called Overguard. Overguard requires a shield, so what does Overguard do? It basically amplifies shield stuff. And I probably cannot equip a shield right now, and also maybe I can if I just pump everything physique on this test character real quick. Let me do that. There you go. So, Overguard is an active skill that you have to press, but if you press it, you get like this aura, you get this icon down here, which is probably easier to see than on the character when like all the other effects are around you as well. And as long as you have this buff, the buff will be active basically. It's just a buff that you have to press actively. So it gives you stun resistance, shield recovery time, shield damage blocked, can retaliate with stun. It also gives you like flat absorption, which is pretty nice, and it increases your health in general as well. Overall, I mean, a good skill if you're using a shield. How many points you want to put into this kind of depends on the build though. Mokovian's defense is a very niche modifier to the skill, but it can sometimes be used. It gives you a lot less cooldown to the skill, but it also makes you deal 10% less damage multiplicatively, which, yeah, is not always that great. It really is not. So it depends. It depends a lot. Sometimes you want to use it, sometimes you don't. I mean, most of the time you don't. Alright, actual passives now. So Fighting Spirit activates when taking damage, right? When you take damage, any kind of damage, you have a chance of activating this, and when it activates you get more damage and offensive ability. Pretty self-explanatory. The more points you put here, the more duration you get. Keep in mind that the recharge starts happening once it's down, so it's not permanent uptime, but it's rather after, say, like the initial 5 seconds of you having the buff, then after that the cooldown starts running down. So it's like 50% uptime by default, and then if you put more points it's going to have a better uptime, but it's never going to be 100%. Unless maybe with certain items later on. And here's Will is like a circuit breaker, so like whenever you drop below 33% of your HP, you will restore some of your HP automatically and also get some health regen buff for 10 seconds. The heal is one time only, and the 40 health regen, or like whatever you put this at, is gonna be over the 10 seconds, so you're gonna regenerating that every second for 10 seconds. Military conditioning just gives you physique and health, very basic, very self-explanatory. Shield training, if you're using a shield, gives you more shield recovery and block chance, very self-explanatory as well. Veterancy is a health regen passive basically. Constitution is just the like yellow thing over here, the out of combat healing, but I mean it's kind of whatever. The physique requirement reduction for armor can sometimes be nice if you want to be cunning stacking, or maybe in spirit stacking for some reason on a soldier. Usually it's used for cunning stacking. So then you can use heavy armor with like even less physique investment and put even more points into cunning. That's what it can be good for, but kind of that's only like an endgame min-maxing kind of thing. The health regen can be decent early game if you really are playing a heavy health regen build, but usually on most builds it's going to be like a 1 pointer or something like that, or you put as many as you want for the physique reduction. Except for when you're actually playing a regen build, then you want more points here. Decorated Soldier, very basic as well, just elemental resistances, slow resistances as well as physical damage, and internal trauma damage being, well, physical dot damage. Scars of Battle, armor absorption, bleeding resistance, stun resistance, freeze resistance, pretty nice. Passive, usually people put at least like 6 or 7 or sometimes 8 points even here. I think 6 or 7 is like the sweet spot, 6, 7. Yeah, it's a pretty good passive. Every soldier is going to eventually use this, up to a certain point at least. Very nice. 2 exclusives, the last 2 things to look at in this class. Orderun's Rage. So almost every class has at least 1 exclusive skill, which means you can only use one of them. Like notice that when you put a point here, this one gets a cross here, like a red cross, meaning it cannot be picked anymore, until you respec out of this, of course, right? Once you remove this, you can put points at the other one. So Orderun's Rage is the more offensive one, giving you like internal trauma damage, physical, pierce, internal trauma damage, percent offensive ability, and movement speed. Whereas Menhir's Bulwark is the more defensive one, giving you absorption and flat physical damage, but also regen. So it's kind of like absorption, regen, retaliation, like thorns related, but also has flat physical damage, which sometimes can be pretty good as well for certain builds. Note, however, that this requires a two-hander or a shield, whereas Orderun's Rage has no restrictions at all, so you can use this with a gun or like with dual wielding as well. And yes, you can also play soldiers with guns, especially with cadence. Guns can be pretty good because fighting form gives the attack a chance to pass through enemies, right? This chance to pass through is not going to work for melee, it's only going to be for ranged. As you can see also in the yellow text here, the orange text, with ranged weapons, cadence has a chance to pierce through enemies. Alright, I think I talked about everything in Soldier, except for maybe one more thing, that is the Discord modifier to cadence. Discord converts the physical damage of cadence to elemental damage, and also gives you more flat elemental damage on top of that, and also a 1.18% multiplicative modifier to cadence. This can be great early game, honestly, when like damage types don't matter that much. Late game, most cadence builds will not use it, but if you're playing elemental cadence for some reason, then yes, you can still use it later on. And there are some elemental cadence builds out there that do work as well. Alright, in summary, Soldier is a pretty tanky, very basic mastery. does its job pretty well of just being tanky and having decent damage, but not like insane damage, and has some useful buffs like Field Command, Fighting Spirit, and like all of these down here, except for maybe the shield stuff is like always worth it kind of to use. The shield stuff worth it if you're using a shield, and the Warcry is a pretty nice like damage reduction debuff as well. This is one of the few classes that have no % resistance reduction, so it does lack like some damage scaling because of the lack of resistance reduction for endgame. But some of the soldier builds can like make up for that with other ways. Alright, next up we have the Demolitionist. Now Demolitionist has plenty of damaging abilities, honestly. Like Demolitionist is a pretty cracked mastery. First off, let's start with Fire Strike. This is the most basic ability in this class. It is a default attack replacer, just like cadence from soldier. However, this one has no like third hit shenanigans. Just every single hit of Fire Strike will be able to proc weapon pool skills from, in this case, other masteries only, because Demolitionist itself has no weapon pool skills at all. So Fire Strike just deals damage, and then it has Explosive Strike, which is like a modifier to it, which deals additional like damage around the target that you're hitting with Fire Strike, which is pretty nice. Then we have Static Strike, which just adds lightning damage and % fire damage and a chance to knock down to the original like Fire Strike attack basically. And then we have Brimstone, which buffs your main projectile or attack, and if you're playing ranged, then it will also splinter your projectile into fragments. So let us see how Fire Strike attacks here with a pistol, for example. Right, these red fragments here that you can see, those are the Brimstone fragments happening. The Explosive Strike I don't think has a crazy animation, but it's like a small explosion around the dummy here that's happening. I think like, you know, deals some damage in an AoE. If you put more points into these skills, of course, like the stuff is gonna like have a bigger explosion, like deal more damage, or have a higher chance of like knocking down, like having additional lightning damage, or having a higher chance of more fragments, right? Like this, it's a lot more fragments already, as you can see, and if you get even more points into the skill, like you can always overcap points by +10 via gear, so 22 out of 12 points would be the max here, then you would get even more fragments. And Fire Strike is like one of the classic skills that is very popular playing, like to be played with guns. But you can also play it as melee, of course, right? You can also do melee Fire Strike. That works pretty well, for example, with a Nightblade, or there's some other combinations that can like make melee Fire Strike work too. But as the icon already indicates, it is generally a bit more like popular with guns, especially because Brimstone splinters only when you're using a gun. There are two like crystals, two transmitters here. If you're using a two-handed melee or ranged weapon, you pick this one basically to just get more damage. And if you're picking a one-handed melee weapon only, you're picking this one down here. And if you're using one pistol or two pistols, like one-handed ranged items, then the skill is already like so strong that it doesn't need these modifiers on top. These modifiers are kinda boring, honestly, in my opinion. They just like give you more damage and that's it, but they exist, so if you're picking the corresponding weapon type, then you need to just pick them on top. Next up, yeah, Fire Strike, of course, is a great skill, honestly. You might have to max out Explosive Strike before the first ability, though, to get some proper AoE in Act 1, but otherwise the entire line is going to be great and viable throughout all phases of the game. A very good main ability. Next up, we have the Blackwater Cocktail. So the Blackwater Cocktail is, well, just a like Molotov cocktail basically that you throw, and by default it is a spammable skill, scaling of casting speed. Fire Strike, of course, scaling of attack speed. It just deals fire damage, burn damage, and note that it leaves a patch of fire like on the ground, and the cool thing about this ability also is that the fire ground damage can stack. However, only the flat fire damage and not the burn damage. So just keep that in mind, that yeah, stacking this is good, but it's maybe not quite as good as you think it is, but it's still good. It also can reduce enemy offensive ability, making yourself getting less likely to be hit or a crit. Demon Fire, the first modifier here, adds chaos damage, gives you % burn damage, and also debuffs enemies to deal less damage, which is also insane. And which is also why Cocktail is very often not just used as an actual main damage ability, but also as a just like a debuff ability. And Agonizing Flames also goes hand in hand with that. This one has some additional flat fire damage, but also more importantly, flat reduced target resistances for 3 seconds. So this type of resistance reduction, being one of the non-stackable ones, just like the one for Warcry earlier and Soldier, is pretty good, but this one like applies to all damage types as well. Really nice. So yeah, Cocktail, honestly, it is arguably one of the best like early leveling skills in Demolitionist, probably better than Firestrike. Firestrike is also fine, but Cocktail is arguably better if you plan to play a caster, and even for endgame, it can be a great main ability with certain itemization. Without itemization, it kind of falls off though. It kind of rather moves towards the debuff skill only category, or like AoE clear plus like debuff, because of the OA reduction, the damage reduction, and the resistance reduction. Right? All 3 skills have a debuff attached to them. And then there's also the high potency modifier over here, which is pretty great as well. I would say generally people more often play this than they don't play that, but there are also Cocktail builds that you can use for spamming. But I mean, if you're spamming, then you're kind of only like using it as a main ability, right? If you're using it as a debuff, then you always want to use this. And even if you are using it as a main ability, sometimes you play high potency, sometimes you don't. High potency is especially better if you want to focus on the burn damage, whereas playing spam is better if you want to focus on the stackable flat fire and chaos damage. Or for example, if you're converting everything to chaos, then you can only stack the chaos damage because burn damage does not get converted to chaos. So high potency does the following: it gives it a cooldown, right? It makes the area a lot bigger and scales the burn damage even higher, basically. So yeah, great for burn, great for leveling. Next up, we have Stunjacks. Stunjacks work like this. So you throw like a couple of these Stunjacks. By default, the skill has a cooldown. And you can get more projectiles via full spread, right? You can see I get like +3 if I put like this all the way to max. The first skill is not going to give me more projectiles, just more damage. It has a very random spread, as you can tell. The good thing about the skill though is that it can shotgun, right? So if you face tank with the skill, basically it has a lot more single target, which is why most people play those as a rather face tanker. But it can have its issues. I am personally not the biggest fan of it. I mean, like, look at this like spread and like the bounciness of the skill sometimes. There's also ways to play it around dots, like around like electrocute mostly, but also maybe some other damage types depending on conversion that you get from items. I think you can level this skill, but there's just better leveling skills in this class in my opinion. So even though this is a level 1 skill, I would not necessarily advise you to use it as your leveling skill if you're like completely new to the game. That said, you can make it work as a leveling skill and there is itemization for it. Just maybe not quite as good as like Cocktail or Firestrike or some other options here. It also has a transmuter, but before we talk about the transmuter, I kind of want to talk about a passive that is attached to Stunjacks, Canister Bomb, and Grenado called Ulzin's Chosen, which gives you additional charges to the skills and also makes you able to reset the cooldown, give you a chance, kind of like a lucky chance, you know, to like cast the skill again. But before I actually talk about this properly, let me talk about Canister Bomb and Grenado, because those are also related to that skill. So first of all, we have Grenado down here at 15 points in Demolitionist. It's insane, like, high damage ability, honestly. It can nuke bosses like crazy if you spec into it properly. Especially right now, with the additional charges from Ulzin's Chosen. By default, it deals like physical damage over here, fire damage here, and then internal trauma damage over here. And then, well, you will need to find itemization to streamline your damage either into fire, or into lightning, or into physical, or into something else like chaos, or something like that, right? This all works. The transmuter converts the physical damage to lightning, helping you out, like going for a more elemental type right away. And with itemization also, you can then convert the remaining fire damage to lightning as well, or convert the physical damage to fire and then don't take the transmuter. Skyfire Grenado looks like this. I mean, just has some like lightning effects on top of that. Yeah, pretty cool. Next up, we have Canister Bomb. Canister Bomb is a bit more interesting, or a bit more complex than Grenado. Because Grenado, right, if you throw it on the ground, Okay, if the hitbox like hits something mid-throw, it's gonna explode on contact. If it is thrown on the ground, it's gonna chill there for a little bit and then explode. Canister Bomb, on the other hand, does not explode on contact. It basically always waits to be on the ground and then after that explodes. So just keep that in mind, that like the skills like work a little bit differently mechanically. But if Canister Bomb does explode, it obviously like produces fragments which deal even more damage of their own. So the skill itself deals piercing, fire and burn damage, and it also has a modifier which adds internal trauma damage to it, and it adds meteor radius, and this means it adds explosion radius to the base skill as well as to the fragments, which means it's going to be easier to shotgun with these explosions as well against like bosses, for example. So even though you might think this only like gives me dot damage, what the heck, now it also gives you an easier chance to shotgun enemies, which is pretty great. The concussive bomb here, well, just transforms the physical damage to lightning, which is a little weird, because first of all it needs 3 points for no reason, and second of all the base skill has no physical damage, only the improved casing skill has internal trauma damage, which is physical damage over time, which does get converted by physical to lightning, so the internal trauma damage becomes electrical damage. So yeah, like this crystal is just really weird, this transmuter, because it only works for this part of the skill, unless you add like some physical damage to the skill from other sources, from items, for example. Yeah, it's just kind of weird. However, visually it looks like it's converting fully to lightning, which is very misleading, honestly. Like, it looks cool, but I mean, the base of the item still is gonna deal like pierce and fire and burn damage, right? Like, it's kind of weird. Okay, now let's go to Udin's Chosen. Udin's Chosen gives you another charge, and if you put this up to 10 points, at least right now. Oh, actually they nerfed it already, which is good. So yeah, it gives you another charge, and TDM as well, and a chance to reset the cooldown. So let me just like max this out real quick. So you get like 1 additional charge. Now all of these have like a 2 here instead of a 1. So you can double grenade throw, for example. You can double canister bomb, and if you see this hourglass icon right here, that means you got a reset. And now that's why I could like throw 3 canister bombs here. Right, 2 grenades. Oh, the cooldown was not updated. And of course it also works for stun jacks. So you can like use 2 stun jacks here, for example, in a row. 2 canister, 3 canister, 2 3 grenades, 2 stun jacks, whatever, right? Like, you get the point. So obviously Udin's Chosen is pretty nice, because yeah, it just gives you a lot higher chance to like spam a lot more of these grenades, which is honestly really fun, and that's one of my like favorite ways of playing the Demolitionist. Usually you aren't gonna like play all 3 together, because it's gonna be a bit hard to like find all the skill points, select, max out all of them equally, or like make them properly work. But focusing on 1, maybe 2 of the skills is really nice. And well, if that's not like enough stun jacks for you, right, then you can always, starting at 5 points in Demolitionist already, make the skill spammable instead, right? You can just make it spammable like this, which means obviously the charges don't do anything anymore for the skill. However, the total damage modified still works, and the skill energy cost reduction also is going to be pretty nice for the skill. Now that you spam it, it's going to like eat some more energy. Using this comes with a hefty like minus 50% total damage modified though, but I mean, for shotgunning it's still going to be pretty darn good, right? Even though I'm like missing a lot right now because my OA is shit, but yeah, don't mind that. Okay, so to conclude, Canister Bomb, Grenado, and Stunjacks can all be very strong main abilities. They are all perfectly viable. I personally like Grenado and Canister Bomb more than Stunjacks, but if you're a Stunjacks enjoyer, more power to you. All 3 skills, as far as I know, can be viable pretty much for everything from leveling to endgame. With proper itemization, can be really strong, like especially Grenado is an absolute nuke, and Canister Bomb can also be a complete crazy ability. Stunjacks is, in my opinion, like in all stages of the game, like my least favorite personally, just because of like you have to face tank for bosses like this, and if you want to do AoE, the spread can be kind of random, whereas Grenado and canister bomb, you don't really have to face tank even bosses. You just like throw the stuff all in their face and they're gonna like get all the AoE and stuff in their face, like shotgunning from the canister bomb and so on. Grenade just deals like insane damage by default. Alright, next up, another skill that can be used even as a main ability, honestly, is a Mortar Trap. Some people like it as a like second skill to use while leveling, and there's also like itemization for it for endgame. How does it work? You put the skill on your bar first of all, of course, then you deploy these mortars. Okay, so apparently it's only 1 by default, but with items it's more. And it's probably more if you put it to like 24 out of 16 points of items. Many of these like player-scaled pet skills, like Mortar Trap is a player-scaled pet technically, they do have a proper threshold at 24 points. You need like +8 from your gear to spawn like another one on top. What does it do? If you use pet attack, I mean if enemies are around then obviously it's gonna shoot automatically, but in this case to make it shoot against a target dummy we would have to use pet attack here. Now it just does its thing, right? You can do whatever you want in the meantime. You can just kite around or like do other attacks. Also you can notice that every now and then there's like a different projectile falling down, right? Like a bigger one, this one right here. And that is the big one. So the big one is a basically alternative skill that the Mortar Trap uses, which deals additional like fire damage and physical damage and burn damage and has a big slow and a way bigger AoE radius. Heavy Ordnance, on the other hand, affects both the base projectiles as well as the big one projectile. So this adds like additional lightning damage to the skill and % physical fire damage, and the base mortar projectiles deal physical and fire damage as well by default. So yeah, the skill is kind of split again, once again, between physical fire and lightning, and your job via itemization is going to be to first of all get more of them, and to second of all convert to like lightning or fire or physical or whatever other damage type that you want to do, right? Like stream down your damage. Mortar Trap, just like these three as well as Fire Strike, can be a main damage ability for the Demolitionist. Next up, we have the Thermite Mines. The Thermite Mines are basically a debuff skill only. I mean, they do deal damage as well, and like early on while leveling, they can do like a somewhat decent job at like clearing trash, but they're never going to be like a full-blown like damage ability. I think there's like one build that kind of like can make them use as like a secondary damage ability, but never ever like as a primary. It's just not really made for that. So how does Thermite Mine work? I mean, you put it on your bar, you have an active skill, and then you can put down like the mines like this. One cast is going to spawn 3 mines. You can have up to 6 mines available at the same time, right? Once I click it again now, the first 3 are going to despawn. And the problem is like they are stationary, right? And they're only gonna debuff enemies that are standing inside of this fire. So you always want to like make sure that the enemies are like inside this fire. If they are inside the fire though, they do reduce enemy elemental resistances. So fire, cold and lightning resistances are going to be reduced by this. And if you take the transmuter Hellfire Mine, then it's also going to reduce Aether and Chaos resistances. And also it's going to change the visual slightly here. This skill, if you're using one of the damage types listed here, like fire, lightning, cold, aether or chaos, it is going to be a must-have to press this button to play this ability at the very least for endgame, because resistance reduction is a big multiplicator to your damage later on. While leveling, you don't have to play it if you don't like it that much, and I can understand like why some people might not like the skill mechanically. That's one of the reasons why Demolitionist is not everybody's favorite mastery. It is kind of my favorite mastery if I have to choose one, honestly, because of all the grenade fun. But Thermite Mine can be a little bit annoying to redeploy. Once you get used to it though, honestly the casting animation is pretty fast. Like if you're kiting, you just have to, you know, like make sure the enemy like stays inside of them like pretty much all the time. That's just kind of how it is. Also the cast range is not super high, so if you're playing like Fire Strike with guns and you're trying to shoot something here, yeah, I mean you can't reach that enemy with your mines. Just keep that in mind, that the skill can be a little bit iffy. Alright, let's move on to actually one final active ability that is never gonna be a damage ability, it's just a debuff only, the Flashbang. The Flashbang is pretty great though. It has basically no cooldown by default, you can almost spam it. And it confuses enemies, it reduces their defensive ability, which means your other abilities are going to be more likely to crit. And it does have impaired aim as well as fumble, making enemies miss with their melee as well as ranged attacks. Like fumble is basically making enemies miss their melee attacks, and impaired aim is making enemies miss their ranged attacks. So this is pretty great. It's another like form of defense that you can use in this game. And yeah, it's a great debuff ability. Pretty much every single Demolitionist, also endgame, is gonna use this skill unless he gets like these kind of debuffs from some other source already. And as you can tell, this is one of the reasons why Demolitionists are usually called like piano builds, because they have so many different like active abilities that you can use. Obviously, you're not always gonna play all of these skills. I mean, never. But you're probably gonna always be playing Thermite Mines or Flashbang, then like another something like Cocktail maybe, and then like Grenades or Fire Strike, right? Like there are a lot of active abilities in this game, like in this class rather. So if you are looking for one bottom build, Demolitionist is not the class for you. Unless you play like a Demolitionist as a support mastery for some like Thorns Retaliation build, which kinda can work actually. Because we're getting to like another passive here, like one of the first like auras rather. Vindictive Flame is an aura that pretty much any Demolitionist is gonna use, simply because of the total speed, right? The total speed is great. The total speed scales pretty well as well, and yeah, you always want to use this for the total speed. It also has health regen, and then it has some other stats on it, and it's kind of confusing to like know which of these stats are like permanent to yourself and which of these are like active as part of the active part of the skill. So when you are getting hit, right, you have a 100% chance of activating a AoE skill around you, kind of like Soldier's Counter-Strike, that has a 3.8 meter radius. I don't think it actually scales. And it has a 2.5 second recharge by default, and it's going to have a lower recharge with higher levels. And this AoE around you will deal physical and fire damage, and also have a chance to stun enemies. So pretty much the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of the skill are only about the active skill, which only works if you're getting hit. And the health regen, the total speed, and the fire retaliation, like fire thorns, those are permanent buffs that your character is getting. But as I said just now, a couple seconds ago, the total speed is insane, so everybody is gonna use this simply for the total speed already. And the other stuff, well, it can be more useful if you're playing kind of like a Thorns style character, or like maybe a health regen character, then like the health regen can also be nice. But yeah, most characters are only gonna use this for the total speed. Uzun's Wrath, on the other hand, is a modifier to Vindictive Flame, which is kind of like a lightning bolt, or like a couple of lightning bolts that like arc out to enemies whenever Vindictive Flame's active part is procced. And these need kind of like a minimum distance in a way, and also cannot hit the target that like procced a Vindictive Flame. So if you're only fighting one enemy, this will never proc. If you're fighting 2 enemies at a time, and like enemy 1 hits you, then enemy 2 is going to be hit by Uzun's Wrath, or like up to 3 different targets are going to be hit by this. And they are going to be hit by part of your retaliation damage, so like part of your global thorns damage is going to be added to the skill. Fire damage, lightning damage, electricute damage, it's also going to leech for you. And it's going to have a chance to knock down, and also a chance, or like rather a 100% chance to reduce enemy damage. But I mean, this is not really a reliable way of reducing enemy damage, at least not for bosses, because as I said, this can only arc out to enemies that are not the enemy that actually procced Vindictive Flame. So yeah, it's it's a really weird skill, arguably one of the weirdest skills in the entire game, and very niche. I usually just put 1 point into it and forget about it. But there are some retaliation builds out there that I believe can make use of this, and also if you're playing even a non-retaliation, kind of like Vindictive Flame damaging kind of style ability build, whatever, then you might also like want to max this out. But it's really niche and really weird, and usually I just 1 point this. Next up, we have another very useful passive called Flame Touched. Now, Flame Touch is just a buff, just like a Vindictive Flame, but in this case it is only a buff, no active shenanigans. Nothing like that. Everything you see here is just a global buff to yourself as well as all allies around you in a 12-meter radius. Also will buff your pets, for example. Gives you flat fire damage, percent damage, and offensive ability. And Temper is just like another addition to this buff, which gives you physical damage and internal trauma and pierce damage and DA, and also retaliation damage. So if you're playing a retaliation like a Thorns damage character, then Temper is pretty good, which is like this skill up here and these skills down here are also the reason why I actually like Thorns Demolitionist, at least as a supportive mastery for a secondary mastery for a Thorns build, is actually pretty good in certain circumstances. Last but not least, arguably one of the best defensive procs in the entire game, Blast Shield. Now this skill had like no heals, no resistances, nothing defensive so far really, except for Blast Shield, and Blast Shield is pretty insane. Whenever you drop below 50% of your HP, so it's like a circuit breaker, you're gonna get a huge like boost for your absorption, right? Like huge damage absorption, a chance to avoid projectiles, and also max resistances, right? Like +5, I think it's +6 at 14 points even. And so like the max res as well as the absorption is just insane on this skill. Sure, you also get like percent pierce and elemental damage, but I mean, you should have those capped anyway. And fire retaliation, I guess it's like a nice boost if you're playing some like Thorns retaliation character. You get even more damage while this is up. There are items in the game that like reduce the cooldown of this or like extend the duration of this, and those are pretty insane because yeah, Demolitionist without Blast Shield is pretty squishy, but with Blast Shield it's actually really, really tanky. So Demo, yeah, a great mastery. Lots of choices for active damaging skills, not so many choices for defense, but the one defense that it does have is very, very strong. Alright, so next up we have the Occultist Mastery. The Occultist Mastery is a pretty flexible mastery overall. I mean, theme-wise, it is mostly, of course, themed around like acid damage and chaos damage and a little bit of vitality damage as well and stuff like that. But it can be very, very flexible, which is shown by, in this case, let's start with the debuff ability, by the Curse of Frailty. The Curse of Frailty is a like point-and-click like curse that curses enemy around your cursor in an area. And the more points you put here, the bigger the radius is going to be and the longer the duration is going to be as well of this curse. And the first part of this curse reduces enemy movement speed as well as physical and bleeding damage, resistances rather, and the second one reduces enemy poison, vitality, chaos and elemental resistances. So you're reducing poison, wit, chaos, elemental, physical bleed, and elemental meaning, lightning, cold and fire. There's almost every damage skill, like every damage type in the game really like being reduced by this. The only ones missing are Pierce and Aether, I believe. This skill does nothing besides like reducing resistances really. There's some defensive ability shred actually and some movement speed reduction. This makes it easier to crit enemies. Let's start with the damage abilities first. So we got Dreek's Evil Eye, right? The Dreek's Evil Eye is just like a very straightforward projectile skill, which by default is only gonna like have the initial ball. And Bloodburst is gonna have like an explosion around the initial ball. And Terrifying Gaze is gonna give the ability additional vitality damage and crit damage and percent acid and poison damage. And it's gonna like be able to also stun and confuse the enemy. Vile Eruption is gonna add acid and vitality damage to the main projectile as well as fragments, right? It's also gonna add these fragments that you can see here falling around and like exploding as well in a grenade style fashion. Now, if you have paid attention earlier to the last class, this might sound familiar to you. Dreek's Evil Eye is kind of in a way a caster variant of Fire Strike actually mechanically. So this is kind of like Explosive Strike and this is kind of like Brimstone, right? It's very similar in a way. It's a very, very, very strong caster skill. It is one of the strongest for leveling right now for Occultist, and also for endgame it is a very strong and solid skill, usually played with acid damage and sometimes also vitality damage, and it has a transmitter called Focused Gaze. Now this one is a little bit different. It changes the projectile to a more grenade-like projectile, which gives it a cooldown and is going to be great at stacking damage over time, like the poison damage mostly. And this can give you a you know, like a very nice and safe alternative to spamming the skill, especially for like certain bosses for the end game. For leveling it can also be great, especially early if you are lacking some like energy regeneration. If you have energy problems early when using the skill, you can just use the grenade and like use another filler maybe from a component instead. So yeah, Focused Gaze is a pretty good transmuter. Greek Civil Eye, with and without, is both very great depending on the situation. So yeah, great main damage ability for all stages of the game. Next up we have Bloody Pox. Now Bloody Pox kinda starts off as an AoE beast. It's arguably better for leveling with AoE damage than the Greek Civil Eye, because the way it works is it's basically a curse that spreads, right? And also spreads of corpses as well. So you curse one enemy and then like it spreads to the next and to the next and to the next, as long as they're like somewhat close to each other. Actually, these are sometimes like too far away from each other apparently, so like the distance like is not that high, but yeah, it can spread a lot, and that can thus be like a real like clearing beast for AoE. The problem though is that it kind of falls off later on, even with like crazy itemization. I don't think it's like ever like enough as a main damage ability on its own. It always needs at least another skill for single target. For AoE clear it can be fine even later on with a certain itemization, but for single target it kinda never is enough, so you will have to at least later on invest into something else on top. But yeah, the skill has health reduction, which does not work against bosses. I mean, that's maybe like one of the reasons why it's not that great against bosses. Has bleeding damage, and then here big vitality damage, and then here some poison damage as well. Usually the skill is played as like vitality, but with certain itemization or conversion it can also be played as acid or as bleed. Yeah. More interesting is the Fevered Rage transmuter modifier, whatever you want to call it. So Fevered Rage is one of the most interesting transmuters in the game because it does enrage enemies. So this skill does deal a lot more damage with this transmuter, and it also reduces defensive ability of enemies by a lot, making them way easier to get crit by both this skill as well as any other skill as well. But it does give enemies 150% total speed and 25% offensive ability, making them much easier to crit you and also a lot harder to get away from. So use this with caution, especially in hardcore. It can be great early game for leveling, because many things just will die of the additional damage before they can even reach you. But certain bosses can be quite spicy with this, and it can be like quite rippy as a result of that. Fevered Rage in endgame is rarely used, definitely not in hardcore, unless you're playing like certain thorns, like retaliation characters, because then the enemy having more attack speed and like hitting you more often and thus proccing your retaliation damage more often, well as a damage increase to yourself. So Occultist actually has some thorn/retaliation support as well through Fevered Rage and some other stuff as well later on. Next up we have the Sigil of Consumption. Now Sigil of Consumption looks like this. It is a sigil that you put on the ground, and you can put multiple sigils. The cooldown is usually lower than the duration, so, and with itemization you can stack even more, and the damage of this stacks. Just like with Cocktail, at least the flat damage part of the stacks. But I mean, this one has almost only flat damage and only a little bit of vitality decay in the first node. The second node is pure flat fire and chaos, so all of this will stack. And also all of this will leech, right? The skill has built-in leech, and the vitality decay damage, the dot damage, will not stack and not leech for you, but everything else will leech for you. The vitality damage, the fire damage, and the chaos damage will all leech for you. Ramping this against bosses and stacking this against bosses with like other cooldown modifiers can be a really good way of playing like a leech tank, basically like a caster leech tank. It's a pretty good skill for that. It used to be absolutely ridiculous in the past. I feel like it's a bit weaker nowadays, but can it be like a viable main skill? I would still say yes, just maybe not as fast and as strong for leveling as say Greek Civil Eye, or like for AoE is also not as great as like Bloody Pox. It does get bigger with more points, however. So like now it's bigger, right? Yeah, I would still not say it's quite on the same level as like something like Pox or Greek Civil Eye right now. But yeah, if you want to play like a vitality caster, leech tank especially, then that's pretty good. Once again, the issue here is going to be that you need to streamline your damage, right? You have like fire and chaos damage on this and vitality damage on the first one. You want to either put everything into vitality or like everything into fire or everything into chaos or everything into a different damage type maybe even as well. You will need to find itemization for that. Next up, we have one last non-pet damaging ability called the Doombolt. Now Doombolt kind of works well, in my opinion, for leveling together with Bloody Pox, because like Bloody Pox is your AoE clear, and then like Doombolt is your big like boss damage, right? Or like your single target damage. It's just a really cool looking ability, just like a bolt, like a lightning bolt of doom, just there. And the interesting part about the skill is it deals double damage on a direct hit. So like it has AoE, like small AoE. If I hit here and hits the dummy, it will only take like 5k damage, but if I hit dummy directly, right, it's gonna take the 5.4k damage 2 times, as you can see here. And the dummy on the right even got hit, I think, 1 time by the AoE, but not by the bolt itself. So yeah, keep that in mind whenever you're playing this skill, that you need to aim it correctly. And yeah, that's something that I'm pretty bad at, honestly. It's a great skill in all phases of the game, kind of. There are certain spots in the mid-game, I feel like, where if you don't get the items for it, it can be a bit lackluster. It is only one single node, so like once you max out at one single node, there is no like other damage that you can get to the skill apart from items, so it will be kind of item dependent. However, yeah, it is, except for like few builds that make it like spammable or like almost spammable, usually not a sole, like a single main damage ability for endgame. It will rather be like a secondary, like for additional single target damage. You will use this alongside some other skill, like alongside sigils or alongside Bloody Pox or alongside something else, like depends. Or I guess if you're playing a Berserker or like anything that like generates onslaught stacks for you, right, you're gonna like use another skill with onslaught stacks, and then you're gonna like hit big Doombolt. Whatever onslaught stacks is, you will see later when I talk about Berserker. It basically is like a damage modifier for this as well, like for cooldown skills. I guess we can also talk about the passive real quick. That is for players only, because this one is actually not an aura skill. Or like it is an aura, but only for yourself. Like it has no meteor radius, it only works on yourself. It gives you a lot of flat chaos damage, percent vitality, and attack speed and defensive ability. So this is a great skill if you're using kind of like a melee or like a generally like attack-based occultist. Occultist doesn't really have like any attack skills on its own, but Witchfire and the modifier second right have so much flat damage actually that they are still ridiculously good as a like support skill for weapon damage based builds. And as you can see here, you get like some more vitality damage, percent chaos, bleed, crit damage as well. Pretty juiced, honestly. Yeah, attack speed as well. There is no casting speed in this class, however. There's only attack speed. And possession also kind of goes hand in hand with these. It's well, it's going to be great for casters too, but kind of even better for weapon damage based characters because of the flat chaos damage you get on top of that. It is an exclusive skill, so yeah, Occultist only has one exclusive, and you cannot use this alongside other exclusive scores. But possession is a really good one because it also gives you absorption, right? It gives you absorption, percent damage, and flat damage, and skill disruption protection, which can also be good for certain casters. Very nice for that. So yeah, pretty good mastery overall. You will see the buffs being applied down here automatically, and you will also see a visual effect, of course, on your character, which looks pretty darn cool if you're into like this kind of chaos theme. Now, let's talk about the pets, right? The bottom row of this here is basically only pets. And then there's one more skill we also have to talk about after that. So, first of all, Summon Familiar, right? Summon Familiar, the Raven, is an actual proper pet, scaled pet. It's a pretty small pet. It's more like a caster pet that you can direct, of course, with pet attack. You can move around. You can make him attack like this. The default attack is just a single lightning projectile, I think. Yeah, if you put more points into it, it's gonna get like 2 and 3 projectiles on the attack. Let's get it to 3 here at 13 points. So if we now resummon it and now let it attack, it will... Hello? There we go. It will shoot like 3... it's also using the skill now. It's gonna shoot like the 3 projectiles here. at the 3 QPUs here. It also has other skills. It also has the lightning strike here, which you can see here. It's like just a point and click, like kind of like a doom board just for lightning kind of ability that it has that it can also use, which can deal pretty good damage too. And it also has an aura, the Storm Spirit aura, which also benefits yourself as well as all other pets, which gives elemental damage, elemental resistances, and lightning retaliation. And then last but not least, it also has the Mend Flesh ability, which every now and then can heal the player, right? Or allies. I don't know. I think it prioritizes the player if the player is hurt, but I'm not quite sure as I don't play this skill all too often, to be fair. But yeah, it also has a heal. So yeah, pretty nice pet all around. It's a little squishy though, and it's more like a caster support unit. So it can be strong with like certain endgame items as like a main ability, like as a main pet, as a main damaging pet at least. But you kind of want like some other pets maybe in front of it to like tank for your ravens so they don't die. There's also like items that can make you like spawn more than just one raven, but there's not that many of those. For leveling early, it's also pretty good actually. But I think it falls off a little bit at some point because there aren't really that many items while leveling for the Raven. It's just good early and then kind of mediocre like mid game, and then end game it can be good again with like certain itemization. Next up we have the Hellhound pet. The Hellhound pet is well, the goodest dog, right? There it is. And the Hellhound dog has just default attacks, and then also the Ember Claw, which is like an AoE melee ability, like a swipe ability. It has the Hellfire aura, similar to the Storm Spirit aura, but in this case defensive ability instead of resistances, and also more fire chaos themed. And it has the Infernal Breath ability, which deals some more damage and also reduces enemy damage. It's like a debuff as well. Okay, that was the swipe, right? The claw, and this is the breath. There we go. Alright. Hellhound, arguably an even better pet than the Raven. Maybe a little bit weaker early because you need like a little bit more points to get to it. But there are some good leveling items for it already, so like once you have those, I think it surpasses the Raven. And endgame with itemization, it can be also equally good to the Raven, if not better than the Raven as well. So yeah, both of these can be built around properly and are pretty good pets. But I think right now the Hellhound is a little bit better, but then again it can like change at any moment in time whenever, you know, like itemization gets changed a little bit. Then you got one more like pet exclusive passive basically, the Bonds of Bismuel. This will just give your pets more health, the first one, so not overly exciting. Usually doesn't need as many points, or well, it depends on like what pets you're playing. If you're playing some like squishy Raven or Skeletons, you maybe need some more points in this. If you're playing some already like kind of tanky pets, then you might not need that many points on this. And then more importantly, you have Manipulation, which not only gives total damage, like all damage, but also speed to your pets, which is pretty good. So like usually most pet builds try to at least get us to 12 points. It's a pretty good skill as well. And then last but not least, we have the Blood of Dreeg. The Blood of Dreeg is a active heal alongside a buff. So the health restore is instant and one time only, and everything else is like 60-second duration with a 12-second recharge. So you should have this like permanently up all the time. The acid damage, the offensive ability, the regen, and the acid retaliation, the thorns damage, is permanent. And this being like more acid themed and like thorns themed, yeah, it's a pretty good passive. Every single occultist is gonna play this, and if you're playing a thorns build or like one of the damage types listed here, then Aspect of the Guardian is gonna be a really good ability for you as well to search for like plus skills and items as well for. This is also the reason why usually every occultist doesn't really need any acid resistance from gear at all, because this skill just alone gives you 100% poison resistance, poison acid resistance. It also makes gearing for pets a little bit easier, because getting pet poison resistance can be quite a struggle, and occultist just eliminates that struggle right away basically. And on top of all of that, you also get physical resistance, which is a pretty rare stat. 15%. Like occultist is rather squishy overall, right? It has pretty low HP per point down here and so on, and doesn't really like have any other HP passive, like not a single one. The one thing that does make it kind of not complete paper is Aspect of the Guardian with the physical resistance and the free poison res. but otherwise the whole mastery is just a more like flexible, more support-ish mastery, and not necessarily like a pure damage mastery or a pure tank mastery, like say a soldier, for example. In my opinion, Occultist is one of the strongest masteries in the game, though, because of its flexibility and because of like yeah, it like being supportive for so many types. And yeah, Drixivla is also ridiculous for leveling right now. Drixivla is actually like very high damage right now. It's pretty ridiculous. Alright, that's it for Occultist. Alright, next up we have the Nightblade mastery. So Nightblade is a mastery that has a pretty heavy focus on dual wielding, but it can also be used in many other ways. So let's start with the dual wielding stuff. First of all, dual blades enables you to dual wield melee weapons, not ranged but only melee weapons, and gives you, if you're dual wielding, a nice piercing and cold damage buff as well as flat piercing damage. And after that will be a lot of like weapon pool skills, which usually only work when dual wielding. There are some items that like enable them in some specific ways for non-dual wielding as well, but by default they will only work when you're dual wielding. So Nightblade does not have a default attack replacer actually, like for example other masteries like Soldier do. So either you use a default attack replacer from another mastery, or you just simply use standard weapon attack for now. And you can see the dual wield animations in action here. Now if we add Bergothian shears, you might see like a different animation at some point, maybe it's a bit easier to see it against the dummy. Yeah, like this one where he like double smacks with the hammers, I think, is the animation for Bergothian shears, this one right there. I mean, yeah, it's just a default, a weapon pool skill which can proc off top of your other like default attacks, and it forces you to use both your hands when attacking, which can be an effective damage increase just by doing that already, on top of like the other damage that it gives you on top of that. Because by default, dual wielding Grim Dawn works the following way, right? You have a 50% chance to use both of your weapons in one attack, you have a 25% chance to hit with your left weapon, and 25% chance with your right weapon. But if you're using a weapon pool skill that forces both weapons, that has main and offhand damage like this one, you always have 100% dual wield chance, basically, like dual hit chance, and thus you increase the percentage of both of your weapons being used at the same time compared to only one of them being used comparatively. Next up we have the Amarasa's Quick Cut, which is also a weapon pool skill. Is the like quick like 3 attack move that you just saw there. Yeah, it's pretty much like only for single target, right? This one has like 3 targets, this one is like only for single target, but hits very quick. So the 80% weapon damage like is times 3 basically. Here the 125 is times 2. And then you have Wording Death, which is a pretty nice like AoE weapon pool skill. Let's see if we can proc it here. Those are the others so far. There it is. This is the Wording Death, right, where it does like the 360 spin. And it's a pretty nice like AoE ability, which gives your dual wield Nightblade some much needed AoE. Execution is like your single target monster. That's why it's also like so late in the tree, because it's pretty strong by default. And of course all of these skills can have a higher chance to be used by putting more points into the skill, and also by finding items with Fangs of Asterkarn that have a higher percent chance to be used to those skills. Like if you find an item that gives you chance to be used to execution, for example, you're gonna have a higher chance to use execution. Let's see if the skill, the animation, right, can be triggered here. Yeah, the last one where it like dual strikes from the top to the bottom, like Bergothian shears is from the sides, and execution is like kind of like a dual strike and PoE in a way. That's the animation for execution. Nothing fancy, just like fast and high damaging. So that's pretty much it for the like top row here, and you can kind of like simply play around this top row by adding some other like weapon buffs on top of that. Or like weapon, like default attack replaces from another skill, like from another mastery, and or like weapon buffs from like components or skills that give you more flat weapon damage, and this can really basically be like one of the viable ways to level a Nightblade, and also to play endgame Nightblade as well. One of the skills that gives you such a buff would be Amaras's Blade Burst, this one right here. So first of all, let's talk about the skill itself. You can see it only has offhand damage if you're using dual wielding. If you're using only one hand, it will use your main hand, and if you're using a two-hander, it will also like use your main hand, and if you're using a one-hander and a shield, it will also use your main hand. So that's a little confusing, and it looks like this, right? So the animation looks like you're always hitting with your offhand, I think, even if it does use your main hand, which is a little weird, but yeah. If you're dual wielding, it does only use your offhand, so dual wielding is not necessarily the best, really, for the skill itself, damage-wise. ABB is kind of one of the few, if not the only skill in this tree, which, by default at least, mechanically is higher damaging if you're using a two-hander than dual wielding. But it's still great for dual wielding, either with certain items, or simply to use the modifier Lethal Assault. So whenever you do hit an enemy with this, you get this buff down here, Lethal Assault. And Lethal Assault is a buff that gives you % cold, acid, frostburn, poison damage, as well as flat cold and acid damage, which will be added to all of your other attacks, right? So if you're using Lethal Assault, like ABB, and then after that attacking, now all of your attacks will have this Lethal Assault buff as well, and all of your weapon pool skills are gonna be boosted by this flat damage here, because it's basically weapon damage. So yeah, pretty nice. One of the ways to like boost your dual wielding big time. And the good thing about Lethal Assault, like any kind of like flat damage buff like this, is if you're using a two-hander, this will only be applied once, but if you're dual wielding, the full value will be applied to each weapon, so you're basically like double dipping when you're dual wielding with like any of these like buffs, which is pretty insane. So even though this part is better for two-hander, this part is much better for dual wielding. I mean, both parts are good for both in a way, but yeah, dual wielding does benefit a lot more from like additional flat damage sources, like flat weapon damage sources. And Amaras's Blade Burst can be played as a main damage ability as well. Like if you're using like a two-handed spear, for example, or a two-handed gun, there's certain things that you can do with this one. Then you don't need this dual-wielding shenanigan stuff up here at all. You can just play ABB itself, and it will also be a good leveling skill. And with certain specific itemization, it's can also be like very, very good endgame actually. I wouldn't say it's like an S tier endgame skill, but it can be a good endgame skill and can clear all content with a like certain specific setups. It's pretty good. Next up, we have let's go with the medic skills for now first. So we have Shadow Strike next. Shadow Strike is very similar to to Soldier's Blitz actually, in the way that like it is a movement skill that requires a target to click on, and you can do the same like shenanigans as you can do with Blitz. So you can do stuff like this with the camera and so on. You can jump around the map a lot further than you want to, and there's some other shenanigans you can do on top of that, which we're not going to cover in this video. But yeah. On top of that, Shadow Strike deals damage with both of your weapons. It does not benefit from a shield or anything like that, just like Blitz. Or like other than Blitz, rather. And it can be ridiculously high damage. It can be one of the highest damage, like single target damage skills in the entire game. Maybe even like the strongest single target damage skill in the entire game, if built correctly. And yeah, it can be just absolutely insane. The first skill, just high damage. Second skill adds poison damage, crit damage, which is obviously going to be great for your damage, and also adds cooldown reduction, making you able to use it more often. Pretty good. And then the last one is not that great, honestly. Nightfall. It's like this blue AoE you see here around the target is Nightfall's ability. It's kind of like tagged onto the skill, and it can also like put enemies to sleep, which is kind of a meme, because like any damage that the enemy takes is gonna wake them up again. So I mean, I don't know, it's there to like help out Shadow Strike with some AoE, I guess, because otherwise this kit is like single target only pretty much. It's kind of just there to like provide some AoE for the skill and like provide some additional leech, I guess, but the leech is only going to be like to the AoE and not the actual single target hit, so it's not leeching as much as you might think it does. So yeah, Nightfall is a little mediocre in the skill, which is otherwise absolutely ridiculously good. But yeah, Shadow Strike, great skill for mobility while leveling. With certain items it can also be like a main damage skill for a single target at least while leveling. And endgame it can be just like an absolute like boss destroyer, like absolutely insane. Let's move on to the next like rather melee oriented skill, which can be used with a gun as well though. So like ABB and Ring of Steel can be used with a gun as well. Shadow Strike cannot, and this, I mean, obviously it's also dual wield melee only. Ring of Steel, if you are using dual wield melee though, will hit with both your main and your offhand damage, like weapon. And just like this, it's just like some nice AoE. So yeah, supports pretty much any Nightblade while leveling with some nice AoE. If you're otherwise only like mostly getting single target from like the dual wield tree or like the Shadow Strike tree, right? This can be a pretty nice like additional AoE for you. And if you're like playing a dual wield Nightblade and you put some points in ABB at first to like get some AoE, by the point you get to Ring of Steel you can probably like take out the points from the main skill from ABB again, and then maybe only like if you need it the Lethal Assault buff and have only this for AoE. As a main damage ability, however, this can also work, especially focused around bleed damage, because Circle of Slaughter is one of the highest bleed damage skills in the game. It can scale like ridiculously well with bleeding damage, and with certain like cooldown modifiers and so on, you can also like reduce the skill to have a lower cooldown to then be used for also something like pierce damage or cold damage or whatever like damage type you're converting this to. But yeah, by default, it's kind of just there as like an AoE supportive skill, and then for bleed and like with cooldown items, it can be a ridiculous like main damage ability as well. So Ring of Steel, yeah, for leveling, I mean, before itemization, it's just a support for AoE, and with itemization, it can be ridiculous for endgame as a main ability too. It has this transmuter here too, which converts the pierce to cold and also freezes enemies, so it gives you more CC. And if you're playing like a cold Nightblade, this is just like a kind of like a no-brainer to like one-point this to get some better CC and to, you know, match the Ring of Steel visually to your other skills and to make it, yeah, be the appropriate damage type. So yeah, Ring of Steel also a great skill. Yeah, pretty good. Next up we have the Phantasmal Blades. Now this is a basically pure caster ability, even though it does have like weapon damage as well. And so it does scale of your weapon damage, of course. It does have like 5 projectiles, so 5 times 85 is like 400 weapon damage if you're shotgunning all of them, which is quite good. And then the modifiers here would add some Vitality and Leech. Like a flat Vitality damage and Leech also will make it able to pass through enemies, which is pretty good at 10 points. You will have like full pass through. It's a very nice AoE. I don't know where the lightning proc, this Aether proc is coming from this weapon. Let's remove it real quick. It's a little distracting. So the Aether proc was not part of the skill, it just procced randomly here. And then we have Nether Edge, which just like juices the skill even more with like some flat cold and chaos damage and crit damage. But as with all of these skills that have like multiple damage types, you want to streamline, right? You want to either streamline to pierce or streamline to vitality or streamline to chaos or to cold or to whatever else kind of damage type you want to do. And by default, the skill has a cooldown, which can be good for like some onslaught setups, or if you have some reset mechanics maybe on other skills, then this can be nice. Or if you just want to play it as a bleed skill, right? If you want the full value out of the bleed dot, then you also want to play the cooldown version. But if you want to play it as a main skill, then usually you're gonna be able to spam it with Frenetic Throw, which is gonna be a bit rough on your energy, especially early on. It's like the main problem of the skill early, that it's a little bit too mana hungry, at least right now. But yeah, it can be a great like main damage ability, especially with Frenetic Throw. There's like a Vitality setup for endgame. There's, I believe, a Pierce and Cold setup now as well, coming with Fangs of Asterkarn. So there's like multiple ways to play the skill endgame, and where there's also like some Aether setup and a Chaos setup as well, which are like a bit harder to build, but they do exist. So yeah, it is a viable skill through like all stages of the game, if you manage to deal with the energy consumption while leveling. And endgame, I mean, that's not going to be a problem anymore. Endgame is going to be like fine for, yeah, for everything anyway, for all content. So if you want to play a caster Nightblade, this is like what you play. One more skill that we have in this class is the Blade Spirits, or are the Blade Spirits rather. The Blade Spirits are a player scaled pet. So they just like follow you around, or you can also direct them with pet attack if you want to. Many Nightblades just one-point these guys and use them as devotion proccers. But there are some builds that use these as main abilities as well. Or like as part of their... maybe not as like main, but like as part of their like main damage abilities. Like they have like maybe 2 or 3. One of the popular builds with this is a bleeding Blade Spirit build, because bleeding damage applied by pets will stack from each pet, and usually like bleeding damage from like one source or like from one skill only stacks like one time, like it only refreshes, it doesn't actually stack. But if it's like from 2 different pets, then like the bleeding damage from each pet will stack. You might get 4 at 24, and then you might get even more from items. Like you can get multiple of these. Like it's not limited to just 2. You can have like 3, 4, 5. It's a good skill too, but most Nightblades only 1 point does, if they even get to 50 points. Because there are quite some Nightblades that are not using Execution and not using Nightfall that don't even go to 50 points Nightblade, honestly, because Nightblade does not have an exclusive skill. So many builds don't have a reason to actually go all the way for Nightblade. And then you don't have access to Blade Spirits. But if you go to 50 points anyway, because of Execution, for example, then you always want to 1-point us for Devotion procs, and maybe you're actually playing an actual Blade Spirit build as well, and then it's obviously going to be a capped out skill that's pretty decent. There's one more active ability here in this tree called Blade Trap. Now, Blade Trap is kind of a weird one. Blade Trap, well, traps enemies, right? It shoots a projectile. Let me just despawn these real quick. So Blade Trap shoots a projectile. This projectile, on hit, explodes, but like it doesn't actually have an explosion, but like it spreads a trap in an AoE, like it basically throws a net, like an invisible net, and then like it entraps enemies. So like the second I hit this enemy, it's gonna entrap enemies around the point of impact in an AoE. And this AoE is marked here by 5.5 meters, and it's gonna be even higher the more points you put. And this trap comes with a pretty ridiculous like debuff of 35% defensive ability reduction, making it a lot easier for you to crit enemies than without this. And well, the problem is though that like almost all bosses are trap resistant, so you aren't gonna trap that many bosses with this. The skill does have like trap resistance reduction on it, so you can like trap some of them for like a short duration, but trap like actually all of them, you will need like actual endgame sets. And even if you can entrap like all of them, the damage of the skill is not really like that great. I think while leveling it can be a good like AoE skill actually, especially because the second part also like deals some hefty vitality damage and leeches a lot for you and gives you like lots of pass through. So it can be like a very nice like CC AoE leech ability, and I kind of like using it alongside Phantasmal Blades. If you're playing like a caster and you want to like keep enemies at a distance, you know, it can be pretty nice in a combination with the Phantasmal Blades, at least for leveling. But yeah, for endgame or like for bosses, you need like specific gear to even enable it working properly. Otherwise, it's basically a useless skill. So it's ultimately very hit or miss. I think for leveling, it has a place for AoE. But only as a supportive skill. Like it's never ever gonna be like an actual main skill really. Very cool skill mechanically, it's just a little unfortunate that it doesn't work on many bosses really. Next up we have the Veil of Shadow. So Veil of Shadow is the aura, the Nightblade aura, that reduces enemy total speed and offensive ability around you, so makes you quite a bit tankier, well, indirectly, right? And then you also have the Night's Chill, which deals frostburn and cold damage around you, and also reduces enemy resistances around you for pierced, cold, poisoned, vitality. So yeah, it's well, if you're playing any of those damage types, you always need to play the skill. And also actually early, like in Act 1, if you max this out like right away, it can be a pretty good like AoE clearing ability for you as well, at least on like normal difficulty. The damage falls off like very fast though, and it's pretty much cosmetic starting in like maybe Act 2 or 3. So yeah, it's only a debuff. It's a debuff aura, it's a resistance reduction aura. It's there to multiply your damage end game and to deal with resistance enemies. Then we have Phantasmal Armor, which is just like a nice tanky like defensive passive, like pierce, freeze, petrify resistances. It can help you with energy leech. Like if you're struggling with energy, say with Phantasmal Blades, you might want to like put a couple points in Phantasmal Armor. So like if you are getting hit, you are like leeching energy from the enemy. It's not like super reliable, but it can work. Also, it has like energy absorbed from enemy spells, which actually doesn't scale for some reason. And it does have flat armor, which is pretty good too, actually. So yeah, Phantasmal Armor can make a Nightblade decently tanky, together with the armor from Dual Blades. Next up we have Anatomy of Murder. Now, Anatomy of Murder is usually just like a one-pointer while leveling, but like endgame it can be insane, especially for like cunning stackers. Like 25% cunning, or usually like put at least like 11 points or 24% cunning, is pretty darn good if you want to do like a cunning stacker build. Otherwise you just play it for like vitality or bleeding damage, and the damage to humans is like a nice flavor and actually helpful for certain enemies, but you're not gonna like spec into this just for the damage to humans. Then we also have Merciless Repertoire, which is more like the poison, acid poison and frostburn related passive, similar to this one being vitality and pierce. This one is like the poison cold one. And also Thorns passive. Like for some reason Nightblade even has some Thorns support. I don't think like Nightblade is particularly great for Thorns. It's pretty weak. I think it's definitely weaker than like Demolitionist or Occultist for Thorns, for retaliation, but it is it exists, I guess. Yeah, it does exist. Usually you max this either if you need the percent damage or the flat poison for like a dot build. Can be really nice. Like the flat poison here obviously is a weapon damage, so like it can work really well with like a high weapon damage ability like Shadow Strike. Like a poison Shadow Strike, for example, is really great here. There's two more that I forgot. There's Nidalla's Hidden Hand. Now, Nidalla's Hidden Hand does modify all of your 3, not 4. It modifies these 3 weapon pool skills. So Nidalla's Hidden Hand converts some of the pierce damage from these skills to acid, and also adds poison damage and acid damage to those skills only. And it's a little weird. I don't know, like the pierce to acid conversion could be higher in my opinion. Like I don't know why it's so low. I think it should like cap out at like 100% if you like get it to 18 points at least. I don't think it does. And 33% at like 8 points. I mean, this should be 50% at 8 points, honestly, at least. Like it's kind of weird. But yeah, if you're playing anyway, if you are playing a poison acid Nightblade, right? If you're playing a dual wield poison acid Nightblade with these weapon pool skills, then obviously the skill is pretty good. If you're not doing that, then it's useless. But if you are, then it's good. So it's kind of niche, but yeah, it can be great. And last but not least, arguably one of the weirdest or maybe even worst skills in the game is the Blade Barrier. Now, Blade Barrier does make you immune to damage for 3 seconds. However, you can still get debuffed. And also, I mean, you're also regenerating yourself during it. But on most builds, I feel like it's just better to like either keep on attacking with Leech or to actually like evade out of a situation. Especially now that the game has evade, Blade Barrier just feels like even more out of place. Blade Barrier does have like a spot maybe for like certain cooldown casters, but Nightblade doesn't really like support many of them by default. It's a very, very, very niche skill, and usually I never play it, but if you are a new player and you do want a panic button, sure, you can one-point it and like try it out. It's okay. I don't think it's particularly great, and I would not really like play it on a dual wield character really, especially with a Evade around and so on, because most of the time it's just terrible. But yeah, it exists and maybe you find a use for it. Alright, next up we have the Arcanist. The Arcanist is your kind of like classic fantasy mage in a way, if Grim Dawn even has one. And the Arcanist has the following abilities. It has, first of all, Pinetti's Replicating Missile. It's a level 1 skill, the only active skill at level 1 for Arcanist actually. And it shoots out a missile, which replicates. Like it splits into fragments on contact, which is overall a pretty decent leveling skill now for Arcanist. Like it's not super amazing compared to some other masteries maybe, but it's still a decent leveling skill. So the first node just gives you elemental damage. The chance to pass through enemies is actually not from the first node, it is from the second node. The second node, Distortion, gives you a chance to pass through enemies. You get 100% chance to pass through at 10 points. Also this one gives you Aether damage, as well as flat resistance reduction, like reduced target's resistances. This type of non-stacking debuff is pretty nice, and really does help Penetti quite a bit nowadays compared to in the past when it didn't have this. So yeah, Distortion, at least always 10 points right away to have like that sweet pass through, and the resistance reduction is great too. Next up we have Supercharged. This, if you're spamming it, I mean, which you are by default, is okay, but maybe not quite as important to max out, because like a big part of its damage is dot damage, right, execute damage. And then last we have Proliferation. Proliferation adds additional fragments to the skill. So the purple fragments that you can see are the base Penetti fragments, and the green ones are the ones from Distortion. So yeah, this skill is just all about like AoE and fragmenting all around. Like you have like so many fragments everywhere basically, right? It's pretty insane. It's a pretty visually appealing skill. It's pretty cool looking skill. And it can be viable honestly for all content from like level 1 all the way to endgame. However, it is like not the strongest at all points. I feel like it's always great AoE, but it always also like struggles a little bit with a single target at the same time. So I mean, it's a viable main damage skill, 100%. It is good, but I would not say it's like an S tier skill. It's okay though. Next up we have Calder's Tempest. So Calder's Tempest is like a AoE skill around you. Wait, it's fire because of this item. It looks like this by default. Right, that's the default visual of the skill. And it deals like fire and aether damage here, and then like some additional lightning and burn damage over here. The more points you put, the bigger the AoE gets, right? It's pretty slow, like pretty small by default, and it gets bigger if you put more points. The skill can be used for leveling, however, it's not particularly great. I think it's arguably even worse than Penetti, at least right now. But it is a skill if you like a bit more weapon damage based Arcanist skill. I think it's the only weapon damage based skill in the entire tree. So if you do want to play a weapon damage based Arcanist, then Calder's Tempest is your skill of choice. And if you like these kind of like AoE Tempest-like skills, then yeah, this is what you can play. It also has a Transmuter, which gives it a lot more damage, but a cooldown. This is great for Dot, Calder's Tempest, and for a couple other like variants of it as well. Next up, we have the Olexa's Flash Freeze. Now, this skill just looks amazing. Especially when you cap it out like this. I mean, it's a lot smaller at level 1. However, it's very similar to Nightblade's Blade Trap, so it does not do anything against bosses that are freeze immune, and many bosses are freeze immune. You can freeze bosses a tiny bit because of the freeze resistance reduction in the skill, but many bosses will become freeze immune, or like will be freeze immune to you until you get itemization that like reduces that freeze resistance on enemies, but that's like endgame only itemization. So it's kind of similar to Blade Trap, except maybe it's better early because you have it like earlier in the tree. It's like an insane trash clear ability in early acts, and then it kind of falls more into the category of like, well, crowd control, but not boss control ability. Yeah, the resistance reduction also will only work, like everything about the skill, including the resistance reduction, only works if the enemy is frozen. If the enemy is not frozen, nothing applies, neither the damage nor the resistance reduction. So you cannot really use it as a reliable debuff against bosses where you would need the resistance reduction the most. Chosen Sky Shard is a great skill, arguably one of the best skills in Arcanist. It just summons like sky shards from the sky, which like hit. The only issue with the skill, at least early on, is that like the area in which the meteors land can be a little bit random, and shotgunning enemies with all projectiles can be a little like challenging at first. There are items though that reduce the area or increase the area or increase the amount of projectiles that the skill drops. So yeah, there are ways to influence the skill. The second node adds a lot of frostburn damage and also adds freeze to the skill, and the third one adds a lot of crit damage and a chance for additional lightning damage. So overall this is like a cold lightning damage themed skill by default, but with itemization you can either go cold or lightning or even other damage types. Pretty good skill all around, I would say. Maybe the only like issue for like early leveling is like it having a cooldown and you having to aim it, like more so than some other skills, which is why I would also not say that this is an S tier leveling skill, but it's like an A tier skill probably all around. I might be a little bit biased here though, because I personally am not the biggest fan of it. There are people out there that would say it's like the best skill in the entire Arcanist tree, and I can see that. It is pretty good. But yeah, like compared to some other skills and other masteries, I think it's not quite S tier. Next up we have the Aether Ray. Now this build, the skill rather, is really fucking cool. It does require an offhand. Without an offhand you cannot use the skill. And you are basically charging a laser, which is obviously ridiculously cool. It does require you to stand still though, so there's like that downside to it. Which, yeah, is not gonna make it the super fastest leveling skill ever. However, I think the damage of this is usually pretty darn good, as long as you can manage its energy. So in my opinion, personally, I think this is almost the best leveling skill for Arcanist, even though you have to stand still. Because like simply aiming this is easier for me, who has bad aim, than Chosen Sky Shard at least. However, you can't get it that early. Penalty is like your choice at first, and then Chosen can be also played really early, kind of. Our Aether Ray later, and then you also need to solve the energy problem on top. So like realistically, you're usually playing a proper Aether Ray build around like level 30 maybe. But between like level 30 and 100, Aether Ray can be pretty good. And also for endgame, it's like one of the best Arcana skills in the game for sure. There are also new items now that add additional beams to it. So you're gonna have like a second or a third beam or a fourth beam even. I don't know like how many beams you're gonna add to this. Depends on like what items you find, right? You can add more beams, which is pretty cool. The modifier just adds like lightning and electrocute damage and crit damage. So the skill is like fire, aether and lightning by default. And then again, depending on what items you find, you can convert it to this or that, or to something entirely different. Or you use the transmuter, Tainted Power, to convert both the aether and as well as the lightning to chaos. And then you only have a chaos fire split, and then it looks like this, which is also pretty cool. Actually, I kind of lied, it's not just chaos fire split, it's also chaos fire and electrocute, because the chaos damage cannot, like electrocute damage cannot be converted to chaos because chaos has no dot component. So it's chaos fire electrocute now, which is yeah a little weird. Then one more last skill, Devastation. Devastation is it also requires an offhand, and you basically like target an area, and then in that area for 5 seconds meteors are gonna like be falling down, like come crashing down. I think it has like 14-second recharge by default, but because of the CDR I have from my offhand as well as from Star Pact, it only has like a 10-second cooldown. Yeah, the skill needs cooldown and like basic full uptime to kind of properly work. There are ways to like add additional projectiles to this, which is ridiculously strong because it's basically like double the amount of projectiles. On its own, I feel like the skill is actually not very strong. It's a little mediocre for like leveling. Endgame with certain setups it can be great, but I would never say it's like a true main, like a single main ability. It always like goes together with some other skill, because I mean while this is crashing down, you want to use some other skills like Aether Ray or maybe whatever like your items support, right? So yeah, Aether Ray, a great main ability in like almost all stages of the game, except for early game when you cannot play it yet, or when you struggle with energy, but once you have those issues solved, it's a great skill from that point on all the way to endgame, including endgame. Devastation, kinda meme while leveling, and well, you can like one-point it for cosmetics, I guess. Endgame with more skill point investment and like more better item investment, it can be a great like secondary damage skill for a build. But like carrying a build on its own is usually not what's gonna happen here with this skill. Alright, that covers like all the damaging active abilities from this class. We have two more active skills. The Mirror of Occultist. This is just a like panic button kinda. You press it and you're immune for 3 seconds. However, unlike the Nightblade one, you can move while this is active, which makes it a lot stronger. Obviously, like this skill is ridiculously strong. Putting more points reduces the cooldown. If you're playing the Community League, this will not have 100% absorb by default, because that's, in my opinion, like a little bit ridiculous. And it will rather have 100% absorb if you like put more points into it, then eventually it will get to 100% absorb. So yeah, ridiculously good skill. Every single Arcanist has to play it. How many points you put into it kind of depends on like where else you need your points, but putting points, I think up to 7 points is pretty much always good for cooldown, and after that it becomes a little bit worse. But if you have even more points to spend after that, you can also put even more after that. Nullification does more than it says. So Nullification, when you first read it as a new player, you only think it like only reduces enemy elemental damage. Yes, it does that, but it also does something else hidden inside its flavor text. It says, concentrates massive amounts of negative energy within the target area, purging all enemies caught within it of beneficial auras and spells, while allies are purged of negative ailments, including damage over time effects. And that is ridiculously powerful, right? Because you can cleanse all debuffs on yourself and also cleanse all buffs on enemies, except for like certain specific boss buffs that cannot be cleansed. But most of them you can cleanse, and it is pretty ridiculously strong. The problem is you have to aim it, and ideally you want to aim it so that most of the time you're at least hitting yourself to cleanse yourself from debuffs. But depending on like what you're fighting, you might also like cleanse buffs from enemies or try to hit yourself and the enemy with a skill, which also gets more radius the more points you put into it. It's like it becomes easier to hit the enemy as well as yourself if you put more points. And also the cooldown scaling is pretty good here with more points, so putting more points for endgame at least for Nullification is pretty good. And if you're fighting a boss that has like high elemental damage, the damage reduction to elemental damage can also be significant once you get to like 10 points or higher. So yeah, Nullification, a really underrated skill by new players, but players that have played the game a lot know this is basically the best skill in the game almost. Like support skill in the game at least, so yeah. Please learn how to use this at some point if you're planning to play Grim Dawn more than like 1 hour. It's ridiculously good. Now onto passives. So first of all, we got some auras. Iskander's Elemental Exchange is a like buff, right? Like a buff icon appearing down left, which will give you like elemental damage, flat and percent, like weapon damage as well as percent damage, and also increase your energy, and also it's gonna give you energy leech. So if you're struggling with energy early, maybe maxing out IE, the Iskander's Elemental Exchange is also like a way to help you out. Overload has like triple dots, which it can like roll one off. Weapon damage based only though, so like only weapon damage based skills can use these dots. That part is a little weird. Mostly you're just using it for offensive ability and aether resistance. Then we got Elemental Balance, which increases dot duration and damage, and also gives you crit damage. Most of the time you just play it for like global crit damage, because crit damage is usually pretty nice for endgame scaling. It also has the Manifestation modifier here, which converts both your as well as your pets' physical damage to elemental, and also gives your pets more elemental flat damage. This is rarely used. It's better for like a pet Arcanist. Pet Arcanists are very rare though. There are, I think, some maybe like Raven like Occultist, Arcanist. The class really doesn't have that much like for pets. Like this line up here, IE and like Manifestation, like this is a radius buff, right? So it will also apply to your pets, this will also apply to your pets, this will also apply to your pets. So like you can max out all of these for your pets. That can be decent. Compared to actual like pet classes though, it's a little mediocre. Next up we have the Maven Sphere of Protection. Free Absorb, free tankiness. Every single Arcanist is gonna max this out, because it's good. It's kinda like a no-brainer skill, just get it. Conversion gives you energy absorbed from spells, from enemy spells, as well as CC resistances. Which is great too, because CC resistances can be kinda hard to get. Usually you're not gonna max it out, you won't have the points for that, but maybe like 3, 4, 5, 6 points, sometimes 8 or 9 can be good. Depends how many points you have available. Pretty good skill though. Just like lower priority than like many others. Inner Focus has percent spirit and percent offensive ability scaling. Now, it's honestly a little bit weird why this one is like at rank 1 in the Arcanist tree, because it's both percent-based scaling, so this is pretty bad early, but it's gonna be great later. Like, most Arcanists want to put at least 12 points or even more endgame, but for leveling you will rarely see an Arcanist have like more than a couple points here, or even just 1 point. Arcane Will is a circuit breaker, so like whenever you drop like below 75% of your HP, this will proc. But it doesn't really like give you that many like defensive stats. It only gives you some defensive ability, making you less likely to be hit and crit. But otherwise it actually is an offensive buff, right? It gives you more damage and more regen. I think it's pretty bad by default. Like this entire skill is pretty bad by default. You usually just like put 1 point and then forget about it. However, there's some items that like can extend the duration and like do some other crazy stuff with it. And then it can be like a good skill to max out. But yeah, usually just a 1 pointer. Mental Alacrity is pretty good. Casting speed, energy and skill energy cost reduction. It's like a instant max out for any Arcanists playing spam skills that need a lot of energy, like Aether Ray 100% needs this. And also something like Kelder's Tempest and Penalties also probably need this capped as soon as possible, kind of. If you're playing Chosen, you probably only need 1 point here. Yeah, pretty good skill if you're playing a spam caster, like a channeling caster or spam caster. Fabric of Reality, you always get 1 point. Actually, no, not even always. Fabric of Reality is very situational, very build dependent. It can be great for obviously like Aether and Chaos builds, but otherwise not so much. It can also be great for weapon damage based builds, right? Because the Aether and the Chaos flat that you get here is quite significant, and if you manage to convert, like to streamline that damage to either pure Chaos or pure Aether, it's pretty good actually for like a weapon damage based Aether or Chaos build. Doesn't have to be, I mean, it could be Kelder's Tempest, it could be some other skill from another mastery. Yeah, pretty decent item, skill here. Then also Arcanist has 2 exclusive skills. First off, the Reckless Power, which is a casting speed, attack speed, fire, Aether, burn, like themed exclusive. It's alright. I think this is arguably one of the weakest exclusives in the entire game actually. But for certain builds it can be good. It gives you flat Aether damage, weapon damage based Aether. If you're playing like one of these damage types and you need attack and casting speed, it can be good. Also, it has some retaliation. Arcanist having retaliation on Reckless Power as well as on Mirror is a little weird, because otherwise the class doesn't really have any Thorns, retaliation support at all. And the a little bit more interesting exclusive is Star Pact. Star Pact converts Aether damage to cold partially, gives you cold and lightning percent damage, and more importantly, it gives you cooldown reduction, which is pretty great for obviously, I mean, Trojan Sky Shard is like made for this. But it can also be good for certain like maybe cold or lightning devastation setups actually. It's a great exclusive, one of the best exclusives in the game I think, just simply because of the CDR. Very nice. Okay, I mean this is Arcanist. Alright, next up we have the Shaman. So Shaman is kind of like themed around a couple things here. Mostly lightning, but also totems and nature spells like a swarm and vines, as well as pets. So, let's start by looking at the default attack replacer in this class called Savagery. So, Savagery, if you put it on your bar instead of weapon attack, is just gonna act as a weapon attack and is gonna be able to proc any other like weapon pool skills that you might have. Right now I don't have any, but if you do pick Brute Force, which is two-handed only, Shaman is also like a bit like two-handed biased. You, first of all, it's just like two-handed buff, right? You get like lightning damage, health, blah blah. And then you also get access to Feral Hunger and Upheaval, which are two-handed weapon pool skills. And these have a chance to be used, and then they, you know, override their normal attack and proc and deal additional damage. The one with the red swipes being Feral Hunger, and the Slam skill being Upheaval. So, yeah, Feral Hunger leeches for you. If you're playing a gun, actually, it has a chance to pass through enemies, which is really good. And yeah, it's like more bleeding and leech themed. Whereas Upheaval is more lightning and yeah, also a little bit of bleed themed. And more like AoE focused, a bit like less base damage. Okay, I mean, those are like the weapon pool skills that you can proc with Savagery. Obviously, you can also like proc others, for example, like, I don't know, Berserker weapon pool skills, or from other masteries as well. I mean, if you're playing not a two-hander, but like a one-handed Shaman, right, then you cannot proc these at all, and you can only proc weapon pool skills from your other masteries. Savagery itself, though, is not like Cadence, so it doesn't have like a 3-chart, like 1-2 Cadence hit kind of weapon pool mechanic, but rather it is another charge-based ability, as in it builds charges to like basically just buff itself. So it has 6 charge levels at level 1, and then like more later on, and then depending on how many charge levels you have, this is basically like a multiplicator to your damage. So yeah, you kind of want this to be at like max charges at more or less all times. It's kind of like a ramping default attack in a way, and if you're out of combat you lose stacks, kind of like rage stacks in a way you could say, but it's like savagery stacks. Also, if you have at least one stack, this does not stack with like multiple stacks. If you have at least one stack, you will get the bonuses from Tenacity of the Boar, as well as Storm Touched. So like Tenacity of the Boar gives you offensive ability and health regen and stone resistances. This is the only source of offensive ability in the entire tree of Shaman. Shaman is kind of like low on OA, especially if you're not playing like this ability, you're gonna have some OA problems probably. But I mean, there is other ways to get offensive ability from like gear and devotions as well. Storm Touched, I mean, it's mostly there for the attack speed, so like this skill attacks faster and, you know, electrocute damage, physical damage, chance to lightning damage, lightning retaliation damage. So yeah, the skill can be used as a like Thorns skill as well, or like as a, if you have like Thorn damage added to a skill, like retaliation damage added to attack, to Savagery, then this is gonna scale it in further up. Might of the Bear, if you are using a two-hander, like this one doesn't require a two-hander, but if you are using a two-hander, you can grab Might of the Bear to get more physical resistance while having at least one stack of Savagery, and also the damage of Savagery is going to be buffed by 18% multiplicatively. So if you are using a two-hander, you just pick this and don't think about it because it's a no-brainer, it's too good not to take it. Next up, so yeah, Savagery is a great skill, honestly. I mean, it can be used in all stages of the game, however, early game it's gonna be a little bit weaker because all the default attack replacers are a little like slow going at first, for sure. However, the very first mini-boss in the game, right, Balrog I think he's called over here on the tree, he does have a weapon, a one-handed weapon for Savagery. So yeah, you do get like a small boost, at least right at the start. Primus Strike, on the other hand, is quite a different beast. It is not a default attack replacer, but it is a attack skill. It does scale of attack speed, and it has this very nice like lightning AoE attached to it. Now the first skill has like just lightning AoE, and like lots of main damage. I mean, I have like a lot more points in this than in this, so that's why like the numbers are way higher. But yeah, it's a good skill. And then Torrent will add these like smaller lightning strikes like between the area, like between the targets. The one that you see here, right? This one here, which will help you with additional AoE. And then Storm Surge is just gonna act as a buff to the base skill by giving it even more target area, like even more AoE and more lightning and electrocute damage, as well as like physical and bleeding damage, I guess. So yeah, this is a great skill. It has a cooldown by default, but you can also spam it with Thunderous Strike, and then it becomes a lot weaker, but obviously spammable, which means overall damage is gonna be better. Like DPS is usually gonna be better. And there's a lot of like weapon damage lost and total damage modified here, like minus. However, the total damage modified does not apply to Torrent, so Torrent is still as powerful with every single hit when you are playing spam Promise Strike compared to cooldown Promise Strike. Which also means that Torrent is kind of bad when you're playing cooldown Promise Strike, because it's kind of balanced around the skill being spammed. If you do it like that, then yeah, we can just spam like this. We're gonna get a little bit less AoE, which we're not really like seeing on these dummies, but like in actual combat you would see that. It's a great leveling skill, and it's honestly kind of great at all stages of the game as well. If we stick with the lightning theme for a bit, we can also move over to Wind Devils. Wind Devils are these guys here. There's 3 of them by default. You can command them with pet attack. They are player scaled pets, so they scale up your bonuses. And they're usually used mostly for Raging Tempest's resistance reduction. So if you're playing any kind of elemental shaman like fire, lightning or cold, you are going to be playing Wind Devils just for this debuff. However, Maelstrom is a pretty good damaging skill. It's like a secondary skill to the Wind Devils. Like the Wind Devils by default just have like this aura, right? Like they have an aura that like hits enemies around them, like debuffs them. But if you actually like command them to attack something, they also will use this like these lightning strikes. And these lightning strikes are what Maelstrom is. And now the interesting thing is that if you have damage over time from different sources, it can stack, and each player scaled pet counts as its own source. You might think the electrocute damage of Howling Wind stacks, or like any of this damage stacks here. It does not, because this is another special case, right? Howling Wind as well as Raging Tempest being a modifier to Howling Wind, they are aura skills, and 2 auras with the same name don't stack. So even though you have 3 devils, these first 2 skills actually don't stack on enemies. Like you only have 3 devils because of like bigger coverage. However, Maelstrom is an additional extra skill used by these Wind Devils, and it's not an aura skill, so the damage of Maelstrom does stack. And you can stack the electrocute damage as well. Like the more devils you have, you basically have this electrocute damage over time times X amount of Wind Devils, like 3 by default and more if you get more by items, for example. So Wind Devils, even though primarily a debuff skill, can be used as a damage skill as well. Is it like a main damage skill where you're only gonna be playing Wind Devils and nothing else? Usually not. Like these pet-scaled pets, I mean player-scaled pets rather, are usually not designed to be like your sole source of damage. But you can use these alongside other pets, or alongside maybe some totems, or alongside like Prime Strike, and they will deal some pretty good damage. More damage, of course, if you also invest into itemization for them, right? Otherwise, the damage is not going to be all that great. So yeah, Wind Devils, really good skill. Maybe a little bit similar to like Cocktail and like how it works, as in it can be great for leveling. It can be great endgame with certain itemization, but most of the time it will primarily be used only as a debuff. Yeah, so in that regard, like maybe a little bit similar to Blackwater Cocktail from Demolitionist. Staying with the lightning theme, we can look at Storm Totem next. Storm Totem is, well, a totem, and by default you can have up to 3 up at the same time. They do have a cooldown though, so you will have to always time placing these down properly, and if you use their pet attack, they also like do some like lightning zaps here, right? You can get more totems from like itemization, And again, every totem being its own source, the electrical damage of the totem also stacks. Storm totems are only like one single node here, but like with 16 points investment and with itemization on top, it can be a ridiculously good main damage skill for like a caster shaman. And usually storm totems like one of those skills where you kind of want to like invest into maelstrom as well at the same time as you play a storm totem maelstrom, kind of like Stormcaster. And staying with this theme, we could even like look at the first exclusive, call it Stormcaller's Pact, which is like the lightning exclusive. If you're playing like any kind of lightning shaman, then you probably play Stormcaller's Pact, simply because it has lightning damage, flat electrical damage, crit damage even. It's really, really good for damage. Now, the other active skills in this tree are Devouring Swarm. Devouring Swarm is a pretty good, like, very, very early game AoE skill for damage, but the damage is going to fall off, like, very fast, and then it's basically only a debuff skill. It's maybe a little bit similar to Bloody Pox, except Bloody Pox, like, spreads on its own, whereas Devouring Swarm is a piercing projectile that you need to always aim through all the enemies to apply the debuff. So a little bit like maybe worse quality of life in that regard compared to Pox. However, it does have resistance reduction attached to it, so if you're playing a Vitality or Bleed Shaman, then this is a must-have, right? You always will have to play this. Early game is kind of decent for AoE, it falls off even sooner than Bloody Pox though, because it has like only one single node, and it's basically only a debuff skill. Grasping Vines is the next skill, physical bleed skill by default, and then also here you have some more Vitality Decay damage attached to it. There are Vitality variants for this, there are Retaliation variants for sure for this, and also Acid variants for this. Pretty cool, like, nature-like skill. Nature caster skill. If you want to play like a nature caster shaman, then this is a pretty decent skill. And the interesting thing about this is it also stacks, right? It kind of provides, or like it spawns like an AoE ground effect similar to like Black Cocktail in a way. And again, just like with Cocktail, the flat damage, so in this case only the physical damage, stacks, the bleeding damage and the Vitality Decay damage do not stack. So yeah, it might have like less stacking potential by default compared to, say, Cocktail. However, the cooldown is much lower, so it's just really nice for like early leveling as well. AoE, you can like have a lot of AoE, like having multiple of these active at the same time. You can cover a pretty big area. And for bosses, you just like, you know, stack them. Pretty good skill for leveling. It does also, I think, lack a little bit damage, like a big punch compared to like Primal Strike, for example, or Storm Totem stuff. There are some endgame items though that are making these, like this skill ridiculously good again. I think just like in the late mid-game, early endgame, it is probably significantly weaker than like a lightning shaman, but in early to early mid leveling phases, as well as for endgame with proper itemization, Grasping Vines can also be almost honestly an S tier skill even for endgame, because the itemization, be it for retaliation or for acid or for some other types, can be ridiculously good actually. So yeah, there's also I think fire Grasping Vines for endgame, which is pretty darn cool too. Yeah. So like you're gonna have like fire Wind Devil, like Wind Devils reducing fire resistances, and then like Grasping Vines, which are gonna be like looking fiery. So yeah, really cool skill, I like it a lot. It just gets like a little bit overshadowed by like all the lightning stuff in this class, but honestly it's a great skill too. I just haven't played it that much really, but I do wanna try it. I mean, I've tried it, I just wanna give it like a proper fresh start try. I didn't really do that yet, so maybe my statement is a little bit wrong here about the skill. Maybe it is better than I'm giving it credit for right now, but I do believe that what I said earlier is true, that it's gonna have a little bit like less item support than these in like early end game or like late mid game, like when you're still like leveling in like level 80, 90 maybe, 70, 80, 90, it's gonna be a bit weaker than like Savagery or like Primal Strike. Next active skill would be the Briarthorn. So the Briarthorn is a pet, a proper pet scaled pet. So yeah, Shaman is next to Occultist the second true pet mastery. And Briarthorn has, well, just physical bleed and retaliation theme. Then it also can use the ground slam attack. Let me remove the Wind Devils real quick. The ground slam attack that it can use, so by default it only can, you know, just use swipe attack here, like this just standard default attack. And then it also has the ground slam attack, which you can get here, which can, well, give it better, like AoE, a lot better AoE, and also a taunt to enemies. And then also it has the emboldening presence, which is like a roar, like an AoE buff to yourself as well as all of your other pets. So pretty good like cross-pet synergy here. It's gonna roar now, and then you're gonna get this presence. And now maybe we can also like check out its AoE slam. There it is, right? Then the other pet that Primalist has, I mean Shaman has, is the Primal Spirit. The Primal Spirit is a little weird of a pet. It's a temporary pet, but it is a true pet scaled pet. It's like a manticore, like a kitty. And it has like a swipe attack, the stinger attack, and just like standard attacks, I think. Yeah. Claw and Fang attacks and Tail Strike, which deals poison damage for some reason. And Claw and Fang attacks with like physical bleed. Yeah. So mostly like physical bleed themed, and then some poison damage on the stinger. But as you can tell already, it has a longer cooldown than it lives. And also the cooldown doesn't go down by putting more points. The cooldown is kind of ridiculously high, so I've personally like not used this pet a lot. At least not as a like main pet. I know there is like endgame itemization, like trying to make it like viable as an endgame, like as a true like main source of damage for your build. But it's kind of like harder to make it work, I think, than like other pets. So most of the time it's more used as a additional boost to your damage against like bosses. Like whenever there's a boss, you like spawn it on top, and then you have like another pet that's gonna deal like damage to the boss, right? That's like what it's mostly gonna be used for, I feel like. Then also we have the Prime and Bond exclusive skill. This one is the exclusive skill of choice if you're playing like some kind of like nature caster, or like physical internal trauma bleeding, also like melee brute. I mean, savagery can also be played as like physical, like it doesn't have to be lightning almost. Like this stuff here, you can have some maybe like lightning to physical conversion, and you play like either a physical brute, or you play like a physical or vitality caster, or bleeding caster. And if you're doing any of that, then Prime Bond is your like choice, of course. It also gives you absorption, so it's a bit like tankier of a theme. Stonecaller's Pact has crit damage, this one has absorption. So this is more damage, this is more tankiness, and kind of like reflects, I think, the two like themes of lightning versus like nature as well. And yeah, also bleeding damage and crit damage for pets. So even though it's kind of like on the tanky theme side for the player, it is pretty aggressive for pets, pretty strong offensive ability for pets here. And then last but not least, we have the Mogdrogan's Pact. I mean, this passive aura is going to be used by every single shaman, no exception. The base one gives you physical damage to yourself as well as all of your pets, like 12 meter radius, right? Health regen, energy regen. First one is gonna, like, first buff here, Heart of the Wild, is giving you HP, health regen, poison and bleeding reduction. And then Oak Skin has armor, pierce res, aether res, and retaliation damage and defensive ability. Ridiculously good passive, honestly. Really, very, very good defensive buff, the Oak Skin. So like most builds are gonna like do something like this, like 10 points or something like that, and these two later on. Mogdrogan's Pact depends a bit on like what you're playing exactly. Sometimes you max it out for the flat damage, sometimes you max it out for the regen, sometimes you need like a couple points early, especially for some more energy regen. But some builds also like just leave it at 1 point, it depends. Alright, this is the Shaman tree for you. Actually, there's one more thing that I forgot about, and that is the Wendigo totem, which is also like a nature-themed totem. I feel like this would have fitted like better down here, but I guess it also didn't fit because of the setup. So Wendigo totem is the nature-themed totem. Wendigo totem does a couple of things actually. It's a pretty interesting skill. Let's disband the pet real quick. So Wendigo totem, first of all, has this green aura that only is gonna pulse when you are standing next to it, but also it has this red aura that, as you can see, is dealing damage already now, and then it also has the Blood Pact buff which is gonna appear down here. So the red vitality aura is the one dealing damage. So that's the life tab, right? That's the vitality damage and vitality decay damage. The green area thing is mend wounds. This will heal you. But now the funny thing is, it will only heal you if you're standing next to it and an enemy is next to it, right? If you're just standing here and there's no enemy next to me, it's not gonna heal me. It is only gonna heal me if there's an enemy like the dummy next to it, right? Like basically if the totem can deal damage, only then it can also heal you. So it's kind of interesting. And then the Blood Pact buff though is a buff that will be applied no matter where you stand. So even if I have the totem here, right, and if I walk to the totem here, even though it doesn't proc the heal, it does give me the Blood Pact buff. And the Blood Pact buff gives you vitality damage, percent, wit and bleeding damage, and also, most importantly, leech. Like, it gives you attack damage converted to health. This is weapon damage based leech. So you can just put this down even on like a promise strike or a savagery build, simply to give yourself some leech from like these weapon damage based abilities. So say you have a gun, right, and sure, you might not proc the mend wounds because the enemy is not gonna stand next to your totem. You still want to put the totem like next to you and not next to the enemy, because you're still getting the leech from the Blood Pact and you're gonna, like, you know, shoot with a gun here. So just in mind, like, keep it in mind, right, that the totem can be useful even if you're not proccing the mend heal, mend wounds thingy, if you're playing like a ranged character. It's obviously better for melee, but if you're playing ranged, it can still be useful with the Blood Pact. And then one final thing I also forgot is the Corrupted Storm, right? The Corrupted Storm totem can also give you vitality storm totems. So at that point, the storm totem is going to look very similar, I think the same actually as the Wendigo totem. And but yeah, these shoot vitality lightning bolts now, which also deal vitality damage instead of lightning damage, which is pretty cool. Yeah, they convert all lightning to wit, and yeah, they're gonna be applying vitality damage. And now we have covered everything in Shaman. Alright, next up we have the Inquisitor tree. So, like, Inquisitor is a class that has also several, like, themes. One of them being the dual wield gun theme. So Inquisitor does have ranged expertise, which allows you to dual wield ranged weapons, guns. Or actually also one-handed crossbows now. On top of that, it has weapon pool skills over here, bursting round, chilling rounds, and storm spread, which require ranged like weapons as well. So let's take a look at this. So if we look at like this gun and this gun, we can like dual wield guns or like crossbows and guns with ranged expertise right away. Right, pew pew. You can hear the different sound effects from the gun and the crossbow as well. And yeah, then let's put some points into these so they can proc. So this is the storm spread proc. This is the bursting round proc. Bursting round. Storm spread. Chilling rounds. Okay, there we go. So, as you could see, the animations for these are different, and they're gonna attack a different amount of time depending on like the weapon pool skill as well. The bursting round like only shoots one time with both guns, with like a fire explosion being procced on hit. Chilling rounds shoots twice, so it's like 4 projectiles with 2 guns, and also passes through all enemies and has a chance to freeze. And storm spread also attacks 2 times, so you have like not just 3 but 6 projectiles, and if you put this like higher, I think you have 4, so you actually have 8 projectiles. So yeah, all skills are pretty good in their own way. Which one you should like max or focus on, or if you should just like get all of them, depends on your build, depends on your items, depends on like how much other chance to be used you're getting from other weapons. Inquisitor on its own for guns is honestly not that great though, because sure, it has like the ability to dual wield guns and like it has these weapon pool skills. However, it does not have like a default attack replacer, and it kind of shines a lot more when you like combine this early with something like a Onslaught Berserker or a Savagery Shaman or a Cadence Soldier or a Righteous Fervor Oathkeeper, or the most popular one being the Purifier, right? You combine it with a Fire Strike Demolitionist. And then this gun gameplay kind of shines. On its own, Gun Inquisitor is kind of average, mediocre maybe. I don't think it's like particularly good to like level with guns as Inquisitor. I would heavily not like advise you to not do that unless you are combining it right away with like a Demolitionist, for example, and you're like going hard into like Fire Strike and so on. Then it can be great, of course, but like on its own, meh. Next up we have, let's go with the classic Word of Pain and Stormbox first. So Word of Pain is a curse ability similar to the Curse of Frailty from the Occultist, but in this case a lot more damage oriented. So the first node gives you fire and cold damage, the second node gives you lightning damage, the third node gives you additional elemental damage. So it's like tri-elemental basically overall, and every one of these also has a debuff. The first one's just attack speed slow, which is not that insane. The second one is impaired aim, which is a little bit better, makes enemies like miss their projectiles, and the third one is a debuff to Aether, Pierce and Chaos resistance reduction. So endgame at least, if you're playing any Pierce, Aether or Chaos resistance reduction Inquisitor, you will have to play Word of Pain simply as a debuff. As a damage ability, I mean for leveling, for AoE it is pretty insane. It's pretty good for AoE early. And with itemization it can also be like a decent like AoE clearing ability later on. However, it's kind of like in a similar situation to maybe like Bloody Pox endgame, or like as a damage ability in general, as in it is great for AoE, especially while leveling. Later on, either a debuff only or with itemization can still be a great AoE clearing ability, but never like single target. So you always need like something else to accompany the skill, and it's not really gonna be like a single source of like damage. Stormbox on the other hand is a bit more single target focused. So Stormbox works like this, right? It first of all adds just this like lightning net to the enemy, which is the primary box, which deals lightning damage, electrocute damage, and reduces enemy defensive ability, and deals like damage in an area around this enemy. And obviously, I mean, this being attached to the enemy, if the enemy moves, it's gonna like also move the damage around. And then the second node here, Lightning Tether, is the tether that you just saw here. So Tether deals damage whenever something moves through it, and also it deals damage to the primary target that it's attached to, I believe, as well. You can have multiple targets attached. You can have like multiple tethers for, you know, better AoE, which is pretty nice. And the scaling of this is a little weird, because I believe that Lightning Tether scales of casting speed, so the more casting speed you have, the faster the damage of the tether ticks. Whereas Stormbox is not affected by casting speed at all. Stormbox can be a pretty good skill for leveling, and it's kind of like the more single target oriented Word of Pain. It has some pretty good itemization as well, and it can be a great endgame skill with certain itemization as well. But kind of similar to Word of Pain, usually it's not enough on its own. It needs like some support from either another skill, either Word of Pain for better AoE, or some other skill for just like additional damage in general. But yeah, Stormbox is a great skill. Really great skill for leveling. You can pretty much do solo Stormbox with some AoE from like Word of Pain for leveling. That's like one of the best ways to level Inquisitor in my opinion. Way better than just guns. But endgame, it requires some heavy lifting from items, otherwise like both of these skills are gonna like fall off. Next up we have the runes, right? That's like the second, or like the third theme rather. We have like the gun theme, the elemental caster theme, and then we have the rune theme. Or, well, the runes in this game are more like traps, right? So you have the Rune of Fagrad, lay down below an enemy. It has like a short arming duration, and then it's gonna explode. I mean, you can also like prepare like multiple of these, and then like wait for the enemy to like walk over them, prepare like a trap and stuff like that. It's pretty good against totems, for example, as well. The first node, I mean, it's just the skill itself. The second node adds additional like defensive ability spread to the skill and like boosts the damage a little bit. And the third one is adding additional projectiles to the skill and also additional frostburn damage and a chance to freeze. It's a good skill. Currently, like pre-Fangs of Asterkarn rather, it doesn't have that many like supporting items for leveling, but with Fangs of Asterkarn it is gonna get quite a few of them, so I believe that the Rune of Fagrad is also gonna be a pretty decent way to level an Inquisitor. Probably one of the best ways as well, like probably also better than guns actually. The other rune is the Rune of Occultist. Now this one is arguably the best leveling skill in Inquisitor. Maybe tied with like Word of Pain and Stormbox. It comes on a little bit later, but once you have it and like once you have some items for it, it absolutely like destroys everything. So the skill itself is just the rune and the explosions, and the second one, Ignition, is the initial explosion that happens after you put it down. So like when you put it down, this explosion right here is Ignition, which kind of helps with the arming time. So all these have arming time, but Ignition has a stun and some damage as well, like up front. So it helps with like some upfront damage. It helps like with a stun to keep enemies like in the like trigger range in a way. And then when it does trigger, the projectiles like absolutely strike everything, and they can also like shotgun and so on. Like the fragments are just pretty insane for bossing as well as for AoE, honestly. So if you are good at like using the skill, then it's pretty much good at all levels in the entire game. Like from level, whenever you get this, it's not level 1, but a little bit later, to like all the way to endgame. And like there's endgame itemization for it. It's a pretty good skill. Now both of these runes can be buffed by the artifact handling over here, and artifact handling gives you less cooldown reduction to less cooldown rather to the skills, so you can like spam your runes more often. Also it just modifies the damage and gives you crit damage, so pretty much any like Rune of Fagrad or Rune of Occultist build is gonna like use the skill, because it's gonna be like way too good not to use it, right? It's you just click it. It's kind of like the Ulzin's Chosen just for the runes. I wonder if they should maybe like add a charge to this even. It would be kind of like adding another charge to like the runes would they maybe help like to, you know, get more like burst damage early on. I think they should do that. We'll see. Then we have the Inquisitor Seal here, which is a defensive skill. Inquisitor Seal is a skill you kind of just want to like put under your own feet. It's gonna give you this barrier buff. This barrier buff is gonna give you flat absorption from like all damage sources and elemental resistances, and a little bit more of health regen. Also, it gives you Rebuke, which deals fire damage. Like this is just the skill itself dealing fire damage, which deals more damage to like Ethereals, Chthonians, and Eldritch and so on. And then Arcane Empowerment is a buff to the player. So this kind of like modifies Barrier in a way, because like Barrier is a buff, like is the buff that is applied to you. And Arcane Empowerment is like a buff to Barrier, so Arcane Empowerment is a buff to you, giving you Pierce Elemental Flat damage, which is pretty good for like gun gameplay. Present all damage, which is fine for everything obviously, and crit damage, and also Fire Retaliation, leaning a little bit into that like retail thorns kind of theme, but I think Inquisitor is not really like that great for thorns. I mean, it's okay maybe, but I feel like it's maybe better than Arcanist, but worse than Demolitionist. Anyway, Inquisitor Seal is a pretty good skill at absorbing or like giving you defense against hordes of trash and multiple projectile abilities like shotguns and stuff like that. It's not helping a lot against like single big hits though, because flat absorption is kind of bad against single big hits, so sometimes it is still better to evade than to stand inside the seal, right? Because certain abilities you cannot tank in the seal, so it can be a little bit bait for new players maybe. And then there's a transmitter here which gives it less cooldown if you're using a two-hander, I guess. I mean, this transmitter is a little uninspiring. I think it used to be a bit more interesting in the past, but yeah. I mean, if you have a two-hander, you just pick it, so you can use it more often, I guess. I don't know. One transmitter I actually forgot about Stormbox, as you can also convert Stormbox to Aether, which is not gonna touch the electrocute damage, of course, so... And I think it also doesn't convert to Tether, actually. It only converts the initial box, so it's a little bit scuffed of a modifier, honestly. One more true damage ability that we're missing is the Flames of Ignafar. This channeling skill, similar to like Aether Ray or Drain Essence as well. I kinda not the biggest fan of the skill, to be fair, but it can work. You can also level with it. I think it's definitely going to be slower than Runes and slower than Stormbox, Word of Pain, and also slower than guns if you're playing a proper gun secondary class, like a Demolitionist or something like that. But you can level with it. I mean, it's still faster to do Ignafar leveling than solo Inquisitor guns, I think. Because solo Inquisitor guns are like really not that great. But I don't see it being better than like these for leveling. For endgame though, the skill works totally fine, and there are some pretty interesting builds with it. One of them being also like a retaliation fire build actually. So there is one retaliation build with Inquisitor that uses Fangs of Asterkarn for retaliation. I don't think the skill has any retaliation by default, but there's some itemization that does that for you. Anyway, the skill itself has like fire burn damage here, lightning damage here, crit damage, electrocute damage here. Yeah, defensive ability shred here to like help critting to like, yeah, make the crit damage make sense. And then the last one is only like dot increase, fumble, and skill cost reduction, which will be needed probably, otherwise you're gonna be out of energy a lot. Unfortunately, it's like at the end of the tree, so you will have to figure out energy before getting here in another way. Then there's also Tainted Flame, which converts it to Chaos. Both fire and lightning damage converted to Chaos, which makes it look like this, which is pretty cool. That is the Fangs of Asterkarn, basically. This is a main damage ability that can work in all stages of the game, I would dare to say, assuming you have somewhat decent energy. I mean, there's gonna be an energy issue though for leveling for sure. I'm not sure how well you can solve it, and yeah, I think it's just worse than Runes or Dust for leveling. But yeah, it can be used. Next up we have some passives. Deadly Aim. This is just a, if you crit even more kind of ability. It's kind of like a win more passive. Offensive, win more passive. Can elevate Inquisitor to pretty ridiculous damage numbers, but yeah, you have to crit first in the first place. And then we have the Word of Renewal. The there it is. Word of Renewal. The heal. The active heal is again instantly applied, and the other things are a permanent buff. The less damage from Chthonians and Eldritch can be actually really nice. Defensive ability and movement speed. Then here we have some flat health, armor, and CC resistances. Pretty good too. And then Steel Resolve is percent damage for physical, elemental, and eternal trauma. And more damage to Chthonians, Eldritch, and Aether resistance, and Chaos resistance, and flat physical as well. Steel Resolve is pretty cracked, honestly. It's a pretty good skill. Very, very great. I mean, this entire line is very good. The Transmuter is, yeah, for two-handers, gives you like less recharge and more heal if you're playing a two-hander. Kinda similarly uninspiring as the Runic Seal, honestly. But yeah, it's good for two-handers. You pick it if you're playing a two-hander. Then we have Horn of Gander. Horn of Gander is basically a debuff ability only, usually. However, it deals some damage, and there are some itemizations for endgame that can make it somewhat decent for AoE clearing. But it's mostly a debuff ability only, and it's mostly only used to debuff enemy damage. Like, it's kind of like a war cry in that regard. Can confuse enemies and reduce enemy damage, and it honks. So yeah, it's a pretty cool skill, honestly. It's a kind of fun skill. Has been memed on a lot, but honestly it's not that bad. Pretty good radius at max. Not quite as good as Warcry, I think, but still pretty good. Then also Inquisitor has two exclusives, the Aura of Conviction and the Aura of Censure. Aura of Conviction is there for like physical, pierce, offensive ability, physical resistance. It's more like the pierce physical theme. And Aura of Censure is the elemental theme. If you're playing an elemental build, you absolutely have to play this all the time because it has resistance reduction, and resistance reduction is, well, one of the best multiplicators in the game, so you have to play this if you're playing elemental. It's like pretty much mandatory. Like, if you have a second class with like any other elemental type exclusive, you cannot play that one because you have to play Aura of Censure. It's just better than any other one, basically. It also has damage reduction, so most elemental builds will not play Horn of Gander. Alright, that's it for Inquisitor. Alright, next up we have the Necromancer. The Necromancer has a couple of themes. It has like the Vitality Caster theme mostly, as well as pets, of course, skeletons and Blight Fiends and spirits. And then also quite some weapon damage based abilities in the form of weapon pool skills, as well as Bone Harvest. So let's start with the top row here with the weapon pool skills. So there are two. There is no default attack replacer in the skill tree. However, I mean, if you have another one from like another mastery, then it's gonna be pretty nice. So this is the Reaping Strike, this like red glowing attack here, which will deal vitality 8 damage and also leech energy as well as life. And then we have this like 360 swing attack here, which is the Necrotic Edge, which is gonna have a chance to confuse enemies, deal cold damage, vitality damage, and it's more like AoE focused than the other one. That's more like, yeah, AoE and confuse, and this one is more like a leech theme. And if you're using a gun, the Necrotic Edge can also like pierce through all enemies. Next up we have, if we stay with this weapon damage focused thing here, we have the Bone Harvest. So the Bone Harvest is this ability right here. It's a cooldown based ability by default, deals a lot of main hand damage. If you're dual wielding, it only uses main hand, so it is kind of best with a two-hander. The second node gives you a lot of flat vitality as well as vitality decay damage to the skill. A bit more like caster oriented maybe than weapon damage oriented. And then Soul Harvest is a buff skill that kinda needs to be used on almost any Necromancer, not all but almost any. So 1-1-12 is what you're gonna see in many Necros. First of all, because the cold and vitality flat damage is pretty ridiculous for especially dual wield setups, because I mean they both get like, you know, twice the damage there. And then for pets it's also pretty good. And yeah, some casters I think don't play it because it doesn't really like do that much apart from like some percent vitality damage. But even casters sometimes wanna get it as well on top of that. You also have the Harvester of Death modifier here, which leans even further into the two-handed theme, converting all physical damage to cold and giving you like another 20% more damage at the cost of some range, so you can have like less range with us. And it only works with melee as well. So this doesn't mean you only can use it with cold damage, it only means that if you have a, like any random physical damage item, this will be converted to cold. But if you have, say, a pure vitality two-hander, then obviously it's gonna be good too, because there is no physical to be converted to cold anyway, because you only have vitality damage, and thus it's pretty much good for any melee two-handed build, honestly. Now let us go with the more caster-oriented skills, starting with the first one, Drain Essence. Drain Essence is a channeling suck, so you channel and then you basically leech from your enemies. You suck the life force out of your enemies, and you can leech from multiple enemies with not the first node, but I think it's the second node where you have to give you like a chance to affect more targets. And then the last one gives you like some more vitality damage and do like OA reduction, so enemies are like less likely to hit and crit you. This gives you more leech, crit damage, and as I said, like the AoE. And the first node just yeah, has the Aether and Vitality like base damage. It also has some like base leech already built in. There is this transmitter, the Grave Chill, which will convert the Aether damage to cold damage. So not only can you play Vitality or Aether caster, you can also play a cold caster as a Necromancer. At least with Drain Essence. Drain Essence is a... well, it's a little slow because it's like a channeling skill, right? You have to stand still to attack. But otherwise, I think it's actually a leveling skill that's fine for leveling. And it's also obviously great for endgame. So Drain Essence can be played at any stage of the game. Honestly, it can be played from level 1 to endgame. It is, compared to other leveling setups, I would dare to say not the fastest. Certainly not, like far from. But it's pretty safe because of the leech. As long as you manage your energy and your other like tankiness stats decently, you should be a pretty great like leech tank by default, like leech caster. Next up we have the Ravenous Earth, the Ravenous Butthole as some people like to call it. It's a good skill as well. It's a little weird, like it has great AoE because like the projectiles explode when like the Ravenous Earth is not directly under the enemy. If the Ravenous Earth is directly under the enemy, then like the projectiles are gonna like hit the enemy once, but they aren't actually gonna explode. Like here, for example, like the second the zombie like moved away a little further from the center, it did explode. Like these are exploding now. But if the enemy is not moving, then it still deals damage, but it's not exploding, so you're getting like a little bit less damage. So yeah, it's a little weird skill, but honestly it's a pretty good skill still. It's one of the best leveling skills in the game. Oh yeah, that's being an indicator of like how weird the skill can be, I guess. This projectile like still bugging out here. It's in my opinion like still one of the best ways to level Necromancer if you're playing a Witcaster, because it is like you're more mobile and flexible than with Drain Essence. But you have like less leech, so it's maybe a bit like I mean it depends like whatever is harder for you to play. It depends on the playstyle that you like to play. It is primarily a vitality skill. Do not be fooled by the poison damage, do not be fooled by like the appearance. It is primarily a vitality skill. However, you can convert it fully to poison with like an offhand from the Ugnambog, or you can also convert it to like full vitality with vitality decay with some other like items as well. Decay is pretty good because it also, on top of like giving you more percent damage and more duration to the skill, it also gives you damage reduction debuff. And then Fall Eruption is kind of weird because Fall Eruption only works if you kill an enemy. It's like a corpse explosion kind of thing, but it only like works if you kill the enemy with Ravenous Earth and nothing else. So obviously against bosses it does nothing. And it does reduce, like the explosion that happens after the enemy dies, then reduces resistances of everybody else like getting hit by the explosion. So the resistance reduction part being on this is really weird to me and makes kind of like no sense, and it's very unreliable. Like it obviously doesn't work against bosses, but it can be like a decent like skill for like trash clear. Why it has Aether damage, I have no idea, but I guess that's kind of hard to like convert that Aether damage to vitality as well. Oh well. The base skill though is just pretty good, so yeah. All the fragments, all the potential shotgunning with like multiple enemies around you is pretty good on this skill. It's one of the best leveling skills, and endgame with specific itemization it can be a good level, like main ability as well. If you don't have like specific setup, it kind of falls more into the secondary damage or like just debuff type skill, with decay like giving you the damage reduction. But then it also, yeah, the decay has competition from Ill-Omen, because Ill-Omen also has damage reduction, and most builds that only want the Ill-Omen or like the damage reduction debuff endgame, they rather play Ill-Omen, because it's a little bit like easier to apply. So like it spreads like Bloody Pox, but the damage is rather similar to Devouring Swarm, I would say, so like worse than Pox. Like it can be like decent early game AoE damage, but then very quickly gets relegated to a debuff skill only, and in this case it doesn't even have any resistance reduction, unless you get resistance reduction to the skill from items. That can be pretty common, honestly, and otherwise it's a reliable way to apply damage reduction to enemies if you don't have this type of debuff already from other sources. So yeah, good skill, but debuff category only, pretty much. Then we also have Siphon Souls. Now Siphon Souls is a pretty cool looking skill, and I mean it has lots of leech as well, and it has like a duration, and like it leeches for you over that duration, and Blood Boil like reduces enemy OA even more and adds like bleed and vit decay damage to it. And Seer Souls converts it to Aether, which also looks pretty cool, but it's generally a little bit weaker in Aether than Vitality. This skill, I feel like, is never ever a main ability, and it's also not a mandatory debuff skill. But it can be kind of like a decent secondary caster damaging skill and like a debuff slash secondary tertiary like AoE damage skill hybrid for casters that like lack sustain, maybe. I don't know. It's an okay skill. Siphon Souls is a pretty cool skill. I don't think it's like a particularly insanely great skill, but it's okay. And it has a place, it has like some niches even for endgame. And for leveling, yeah, if you like it for AoE, it's pretty nice. Pretty good at certain stages of the game. So like, I would say the three like main skills you want to play for leveling as a Necro if you don't play pets are Drain Essence or Ravenous Earth or Bone Harvest, but for like Bone Harvest you have to play like with a big fat two-hander, or like with the two bone scythes that make you able to spam the skill. So you can either like level with like spam Bone Harvest, or you can do like the big like two-hander with Bone Harvest, and then when it's on cooldown you're gonna proc like Reaping Strike and Necrotic Edge, and like ideally have like another default attack replacer on top of that. Kind of like a weapon damage based build. Let's talk about Reap Spirit next, actually, because Reap Spirit is a hybrid pet and non-pet skill. So like, it is a skill that deals damage based on your damage. This first like projectile that you're like shooting out deals damage based on your damage, but the pet that you're spawning is a pet scaled like a true pet. So you can use it for like either or. You can either use it as a actual like damage skill, or you can use it as just a summoning skill to summon you another pet for your pet build. I would say most people by default use it rather as a summoning skill for another pet build, like for another pet for your pet build. But there are specific setups, mostly for endgame only though, that make it work for like a player scaled, like a nuke ability as well. Next up we have the Raised Skeletons. Now the Raised Skeletons are arguably the best leveling skill in the game, almost, and definitely for Necromancer. They are pretty darn good at dealing damage. There are a lot of them, and the interesting thing about these guys is like, depending on how many skills points you have in the skill, you can summon different skeletons. If you only have like one, you can like usually like spawn only like either the melee guys with their melee weapons here, or maybe some crossbow guys. But if you have more points into them, you can summon like mages and revenants, like true like knights and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. Let's see what we get here. I've got 3 mages even. It's kind of crazy RNG, I guess. And they have like different abilities, which is pretty cool. You can have more of them, of course, with Undead Legion, and then you can buff them with Will of the Crypt even more. So skeletons are like overall a pretty good pet. However, you have to keep in mind that they are not very tanky. They are the most disposable type of pet in the game. So you will have to either resummon them a lot or invest a lot into like pet tankiness to make them work. But they work very, very well at all stages of the game. Ridiculous pets all the way from level 1 to end game basically, if you gear them right. Very, very strong. Also we have the Blind Fiend, the Stinky Potato, as some people call it. Yeah, it's rather tank for your skeletons in a way, because like your skeletons are like so squished, and then like the Blind Fiend like helps out with tanking. It also helps out with tanking with the Rotting Fumes ability, which taunts enemies around it. If you put more points, I think the additional threat generation becomes a taunt actually. And it also has the Blight Burst ability, which you can see every now and then whenever it does like this explosion here, right? This is the Blight Burst ability, which also kind of taunts enemies and like, you know, confuses enemies and deals some poison damage, I guess. I haven't personally played this ability much apart from just like using it as a like tank dummy for my skeletons. So I'm not like very experienced with playing Blight Fiend honestly, and I've probably never actually played Unstable Anomaly. These Blight Fiends are gonna be on a timer, so they're gonna explode at the end. They also get a slightly different model, they're a little bit smaller. You get multiple of them, and they become like a Suicide Squad in a way, which I think is a really, really cool playstyle. You can do similar-ish setups with Hellhounds too, but it requires a bit more itemization, whereas these guys, they have it like built into the skill tree. But yeah, they still scale up like pet stats, and it might be like a bit more stressful to play it like this as a pet player. I think the average like, you know, lazy pet player is not gonna play them like this, but this is a very interesting way to play them. I know this playstyle was pretty good in the past at some point, but I'm not sure how great it is right now. And yeah, I've not really like played these guys for leveling it ever, so I don't know how really great they are for leveling. If you are playing a pet build, then at the very least they will always serve as a tank, and there are some builds that like use them as a main pet as well. And I think in those, this pet can shine quite a decent amount. I just can't comment all too much on it. Harbinger of Souls is one of the two exclusives for this mastery, giving you vitality and aether damage as well as leech and attack and casting speed. It's kind of like, you know, kind of straightforward, like just damage and not pet related. And then you have Master of Death, which gives you yourself defensive ability and offensive ability, and also then pet stats. So if you're playing a pet build, then that's like the no-brainer, like you use this. However, the offensive ability scaling on this, the percent away, can also be good for some non-pet builds actually. Like some builds want to use Master of Death over Harbinger of Souls, which is a little crazy, but yeah, sometimes you will see builds use this over Harbinger of Souls even. Alright, then we have a couple more skills down here to talk about. Right, first of all we have the Spectral Binding. This is a like aura buff. Actually it's not an aura, it's just a self buff. This will not buff your pets. This gives yourself health, OA, aether damage and percent aether damage. And then Spectral Wrath is the resistance reduction ability in Necro, reducing enemy physical, cold, poison, vitality and aether resistance as well as their attack speed if you get hit, and then this retaliates back to the enemy, and that curse that's applied by the retaliation is reducing enemy resistances. So I mean, it's still a great ability, and every single Necromancer that is playing at least non-pets is gonna like max this out right away. If you are playing pets though, there is an argument that can be made to not invest too much into this, because it only procs if you get hit, and if you're playing pets in the way that you never want to get hit, then it never will actually proc. So Crate was kind of forcing the player to be a bit more aggressive as a Necromancer with pets, but not everybody likes that playstyle, so it's ultimately like up to you how many points you invest into this if you're playing pets. If you're not playing pets though, you have to max it. There's no discussion. You have to max it if you're playing like any of these damage types. Resistance reduction is a like one of the best multiplicators for endgame. Call of the Grave giving bonuses to pets as well as yourself is another button that you can press as a Necromancer. Necromancer has so many active buttons, it's actually kind of crazy. And Call of the Grave is kind of like one of those abilities that is kind of a choice. Like, on certain builds, it is pretty obviously good to use it, but if you're not a player that likes to press a lot of buttons, you could still skip it and you wouldn't be that sad about it. This can be equally good for pet and non-pet builds, and with some itemization you can have like better uptime or like less cooldown or even like a heal attached to this. But it can be, yeah, a little bit annoying to use it as well as like on top of all of the other skills. Mostly because there is yet another skill you need to use on pretty much any Necromancer, unless maybe you're playing a completely lazy pet Necromancer that doesn't want to tank anything ever. And that's the Mark of Torment. The Mark of Torment gives you damage absorption and reflects all the damage that you take to the enemy that you mark. So you press the skill, you target an enemy, you build a tether, and then only if this tether is active you get absorption, but you get absorption for all damage that you take. So it is great, it is like good absorption. But first of all, you have to like target an enemy, otherwise you cannot get the absorption. And then any damage that you take now, like a lot of that damage is going to be reflected to that one target that you're building the tether to, right? So you're absorbing damage from everything and you're directing the damage that you're absorbing to the target that you're reflecting to. That's how the skill works. I think it's a really cool, interesting skill. It's one of the most interesting skills in Grim Dawn, honestly, because it is also the only way in the entire game to use Sunder as a player, because if an enemy sunders you, when you have Mark of Torment, you can reflect Sunder to your target of Mark of Torment. So Necromancer is the only class in the game that technically has access to Sunder. For those of you that don't know, Sunder is a debuff that enemies can deal to you, which will make your screen like glow orange and stuff. And it is basically a multiplicative like damage multiplier to yourself. Like whenever you have a Sunder debuff, you just take more damage from everything. And reflecting that to the enemy is obviously gonna make them also take more damage from everything multiplicatively. So it's a pretty good thing to do. It's a little cheesy though, and can be a little. I mean, you have to have the mark, like the tether up, then get hit by the Sunder, and then you're reflecting the Sunder to the enemy. So it's not without risk to use this tactic, but it's very interesting in my opinion. Anyway, that is the Necromancer tree, which honestly right now is really strong, but it has a lot of proactive defense. Like it has damage reduction on Ill Omen and or Decay, and both of these skills you need to press proactively to make sure that the enemy has the debuff on them. And then also your absorption is a skill that you need to press proactively. So Necromancer requires a bit more game knowledge maybe than some other classes if you want to like use its defensives properly. Which is going to be more important for you if you're especially playing a melee like weapon damage based Necromancer. Like then you really need to know how to use Mark of Torment properly. If you're playing like a caster, then you kind of also should know it too, but you can, depending on like what kind of caster you're playing, get away with like a bit more maybe. And if you're playing a pet build, then you ideally also should know like how these skills work, but you can just hide in a corner as a pet build against most content anyway, and so yeah, you maybe don't need as much game knowledge as a pet builder. Alright, next up we have the Oathkeeper class. Oathkeeper is an interesting class because it is arguably the worst class at leveling early game, but it like early in the game it is arguably the worst class at leveling, but it can be ridiculously fast like around level 30 plus. So let's start with the main abilities that the class has. First of all, it has Righteous Fervor. Righteous Fervor is very similar to Savagery from Shaman. It basically does the same. It builds charges, making the skill itself stronger, has like some slight buff, percent physical burn buff, which works for every other skill as well. It gives you attack speed, armor, and elemental resistances on consecration. And like internal trauma, fire, internal trauma %, and retaliation damage added to attack and retribution. So it's kind of like savagery, maybe like a bit more defensive than savagery even. And it can proc weapon pool skills, of course. So it can proc smite. And it can proc shattering smash if you are using a shield. So smite can be used by any ability. I mean any weapon rather, any weapon type. However, if you are using a shield as well, then smite will add the shield's damage to smite. And this was the shattering smash right there, which does require a shield because you're literally like smashing the ground with your shield only, and this will only take the shield's damage. This is the smash, and this is the smite, the yellow attack here that we just had. So yeah, these are the two weapon pool skills that the skill the tree has. And both of these can be really good with proper investment, but like most weapon pool skill or like default attack replacer builds, they are not particularly strong early, but they can scale pretty well into like later stages of the game. Shattering Smash has, on top of the like damage deals, also physical damage, physical resistance reduction. So yeah, this is a non-stacking debuff type, of which you should only have one. So say you're playing like a Warcry Warlord as well, then well, maybe the resistance reduction from Warcry might be redundant depending on like how many points you have in Shattering Smash, or the other way around. I think that's like all that there is to say for the default attack replacer. It's basically savagery, just a little bit different. We could also add like Safeguard here as a passive to this theme. This is a shield bonus, so if you have a shield as an Oathkeeper, you get some armor, flat physical damage, and % damage early on top. Now, onto the more interesting skills. You have the shield throw ability, Ages of Men here, and many of you in the past might have remembered this to be one of the worst like early skills as well, because at level 1 it only like hits one target and it doesn't even like bounce to targets. You only get it with Avenging Shield. But I mean, once you have Avenging Shield, you have at least some AoE, so it's kind of decent. And then Reprisal adds burn damage, retaliation damage, a chance to cool on the skill, like to reset the skill rather, and less energy cost. However, now, as I just see it right now, with Fangs of Asterkarn, we're also getting +1 charge to Reprisal. So you can see there's a 2 here, so you can double throw the shield right away, which is gonna make the skill, I think, significantly better for leveling, or like at all stages of the game, honestly. For endgame, with like many setups, it was already like very good, but this is gonna make the skill feel a lot better, a lot earlier in my opinion. So I don't think it's gonna like be like particularly good for like Act 1 leveling, but after like say level maybe 30-ish or something like that, or like once you get like certain items, I think this should be a pretty good addition to Aegis now. Like the charges with the recharge proc as well, like with the reset proc as well, should be pretty nice for Aegis. Yeah, also, I mean, the skill uses the offhand damage only, so like it only uses your shield's damage, and it only works if you have a shield. And then you have the Aegis of Thorns as well, which converts the fire to acid and adds a more retaliation-themed damage to the skill, right? So like it adds retaliation damage to the skill, and it reduces the total like non-retaliation damage to the skill. So it makes the skill a bit more like retaliation and acid-themed. Righteous Fervor, I also forgot, has Reek's Reproach, so not only can you play this as like a physical fire kind of skill, but also as a acid skill, which is honestly also pretty good. Very good transmitter for acid. If you want to play like an acid dervish, for example, like with Nightblade secondary, it's pretty good, or like with Occultist, it also works pretty nicely. Next ability would be Virus Smite. So Virus Smite is first of all, a charge ability, like a movement ability, that does not require a target. So you can use it to charge around. So every single Oathkeeper is gonna at least like 1 point this skill to, you know, get the mobility. And then you have the Volcanic Stride, which you already saw here, which can make the skill leave behind a fire trail. And this fire trail can stack if you get the cooldown of the skill low enough. And there are certain items for leveling as well as for endgame that basically lean into this theme, so-called skater builds. And Skater Oathkeeper is like one of the best as well for pretty much all stages of the game. For like end game, it might not be the very best, but it's ridiculously fast for leveling and pretty good for early end game. It's a very nice like Oathkeeper starter usually. Then there's Volcanic Might, which also converts the base physical damage and in turn trauma damage from the base skill to fire damage, like from the initial charge, the actual charge hit. However, this requires a shield or a two-hit melee weapon. So you cannot play this with like a caster offhand, or you cannot play this like as dual wield. And then Tectonic Shift, the last node here, adds longer range and cooldown reduction and some bleeding damage, I guess some dot damage in general. I mean, this skill overall is really nice for leveling in general. It's always been, like, it used to be absolutely insane. I think it's a bit weaker now actually, but it should be still one of the best ways to level an Oathkeeper. And like can be both a mobility skill as well as a main damage skill. So yeah, this can be a main damage skill, Aegis can be a main damage skill, and Righteous Fervor can be a main damage skill as well. Next up we got Judgment. Judgment falls more into the category of one of those like AoE, like good for AoE, not that great for single target kind of skills, so you probably need some additional like support for single target from like other skills. Judgment has a pretty cool like suction effect, like it sucks in enemies around you, which can be pretty nice for something like Reckoning, for example. It also has DA Shred, like damage, defensive ability Shred on Crushing Verdict, making you having an easier time to crit enemies. Oh wait, we're just one-shotting stuff now, because we're like too high level for this. Okay, this is normal. Okay, I can't show you the suction part, I guess, but yeah, it would like make enemies like fall on the ground, but also like pull them towards you if you use a Judgment, basically. It only works against trash because like bosses have knockdown resistance. And then Heart of Wrath is the lingering fire, like this buff around you. You can also see it down here. And the dot damage from Judgment has recently been buffed, so it should be like pretty nice like for AoE clear now. Yeah, and Heart of Wrath can also be used as a, not only for like additional like aura damage, but also as a like thorns applier, like it can apply retaliation damage as well. So if you're playing a retail build, getting a couple more points to the Heart of Wrath can be pretty good if you have like a low cooldown to Judgment at least, because this only has a 3-second duration. So yeah, I think this is a great skill in general, just not really a main damage skill most of the time. There's some itemization which can make it great for AoE clearing, for endgame as well, not just for leveling, but most of the time it's more like a, yeah, like a supportive AoE clearer / debuff ability with the DA Shred. But as a debuff ability, it's not actually that great because it's only DA Shred and not like some other stuff. Like something like Cocktail and so on has like just more and better debuffs than just the DA Shred. And it can also work as a retaliation applier, as like one additional like source of retaliation damage for a retail build, but never as a like main retail build, like a retail skill either. Next up we got the Spin to Win, we got the Eye of Reckoning, one of the fan favorites. However, in Grim Dawn the spin area is rather small. It's only 3 meters, and the community leaks it's 3.5 meters at least. But yeah, not very big. It does have the benefit of getting maximum crowd control resistances now at least. So if you cap this out to 26 out of 16 points, you have 20% CC res. So you are basically CC immune if you're spinning now. And with the soft cap, like without any itemization on top, you have at least 95% CC resistances if you actually get the stats right. Like just having 15 max CC res isn't gonna like give you 95 right away. You're obviously gonna still have to invest, right? You're getting 15 from the skill itself, but you need to get the other 80% yourself. Pretty nice buff though, much needed in my opinion. It's gonna be more noticeable for endgame. Hour of Reckoning can work at all stages of the game as well. It's just a bit like late in the tree. Similar to like Aether Ray, I think it's a good leveling skill. But maybe like a little bit worse than like Volcanic Stride, and also maybe like a bit worse than like the next one that I'm gonna talk about here, the Guardians. But Hour of Reckoning can be nice. It is like top 3, I think, leveling skills for Oathkeeper for sure. Next up we have the Guardians that I just mentioned. The Guardians of Hyperion are player skill pets similar to like the Blade Spirits, for example, from Nightblade. And you can move them around with pet attack once again. You can make them attack. And just like any other pet, if they have dot damage attached to them, like multiple of these will stack their dot damage, of course. And more importantly, every single Oathkeeper that has physical, elemental, or bleeding damage is gonna have to use Celestial Presence to reduce enemy resistances. So even if you are not using these as like a damage ability, you need to max out Celestial Presence and then like play them anyway. Or if you're playing Vitality or Acid as well, you also need to play them because Signs of Dreeg will convert them to like Acid Vitality. And yeah, it's also going to convert the aura from Celestial Presence. So now they will reduce enemy poison, vitality, and bleeding resistance instead of physical fire and bleed. Or like instead of physical elemental and bleed. So most builds will use those similar to like Wind Devils, as in for debuff purposes only. But there are some builds that can make them work for endgame as like maybe not the single soul damage source, but as one of like 2 or 3 main damage abilities basically. And for leveling, they are also pretty good with like certain itemization. What else do we have in this class? We have the Presence of Virtue aura. This is a 12-meter radius aura again, so it can affect your like multiplayer party people as well as your pets, which gives you internal trauma, bleeding damage, weapon damage based. So yeah, this can only be applied by skills with percent weapon damage, offensive ability, energy regen, and retaliation damage. Thorns damage. Then Haven gives you health and healing effect increases, so it's gonna make like lifesteal more efficient, for example. And it's gonna give you also shield, block chance related stuff. And then Rebuke is gonna give you flat physical damage and resistance to life reduction, whatever that exactly is, even honestly. And reflected damage reduction as well, which is honestly pretty good for like physical builds. Many physical builds, especially like internal trauma builds, need to get reflect damage reduction, because otherwise you will just die to some reflect mob when you reflect your own physical damage to yourself, because your physical resistance is not going to be that high, right? You might have like 80% everything else, but physical is going to maybe like be at around like 10% only, right? So getting reflected by physical damage can hurt a lot, and getting reflected damage reduction is like another way to survive getting damage reflected to you that is, well, physical, for example. So yeah, every single Oathkeeper is gonna play this, and depending on like what exact build you're playing, you're gonna have like more builds, like more points in Haven, or more points in this, or more points in this, right? Or points in all of them. Ascension is a kind of like an Inquisitor seal, but it's moving with you, but it's a little bit weaker than seals. Like it gives you absorption mostly, and some damage, and some retaliation as well, and a lot of percent retaliation actually. Like for retaliation, this is insane damage. But for every build, it's also like very nice flat damage absorption. Less than the seal, but I mean, it's just a buff, so it moves with you. You don't have to like stand in anything. And Clarity of Purpose also gives you 4% of offensive ability, or even more if you put more points, which is honestly pretty good. And then like CC resistances as well, which, you know, have good synergy with Hour of Reckoning as well. And I mean, alongside every other skill in the game as well, actually. But usually you don't put that many points in Clarity of Purpose, because I mean, it kind of depends on the uptime of your Ascension. Like by default you have like what, like a 35% uptime-ish, 40% uptime, like a 40% uptime basically. And it's not really good enough to warrant like putting all 20 points in Clarity of Purpose usually. But if you get some gear that like extends duration or reduces the cooldown, then maxing both nodes can be pretty good too. And you got Resilience. Resilience is the circuit breaker of Oathkeeper, so like whenever you drop below 66% of your HP, you proc this. You get more defensive ability, you get even more healing effect increase, like even more leech. And then some physical resistances and also max res, which makes it, I would say, I mean it's still weaker than Blast Shield for example from Demolitionist, but it's a pretty good circuit breaker actually. It's pretty alright. And then last but not least we also have the two exclusives. We have the Divine Mandate, which is like the physical fire themed exclusive, and then we have the Path of the Three, which is the Acid Vitality, the Unholy Templar kind of like theme, which also has fire to acid conversion and CDR, so it's kind of like the evil Star Pact, like the acid vitality variant of Star Pact from Arcanist in a way. It's pretty good. I mean both are pretty good, because Divine Mandate is like the physical fire variant of, what's it called again, like Stormcaller's Pact from Shaman. Gives you crit damage as well. Gives you slow res instead of stun res. Very similar to, like this is very similar to Stormcaller's Pact, this is very similar to Star Pact. So yeah, they're both really really good exclusives actually. Oathkeeper has very good exclusives, I would dare to say. Alright, I think that's it for the Oathkeeper. I mean there is no other stuff here to show you. Last but not least we got the new fresh Berserker mastery from Fangs of Asterkarn, which has the following main damage abilities that you can play around properly. Onslaught, which is a default attack replacer, which also generates Onslaught stacks. Onslaught stacks are basically buffs that will be shown in the bottom left of your UI here. Right, these stacks here. And per stack, your next cooldown based ability will deal an additional 15% more damage multiplicatively. And with Onslaught, you can get quite a few of them, with 8 at 16 out of 16 points, and even more later on. Then the second node, Open Wounds, gives you just some bleeding damage and damage reduction to enemies that you hit. Like you're basically debuffing every enemy that you're hitting with this skill. And then also Endless Rage allows you to generate even more Onslaught stacks, right? If I put even more points here, I can get up to 4 additional Onslaught stacks, and I would be able to overall generate 9 Onslaught stacks. And then here you can see, like, if I have all 9 Onslaught stacks, then my next cooldown based ability would deal 135% additional damage. If you use a skill from Berserker itself, we could try that with Leap. So if I have this capped to 9, or what, to 8 now, because I respect, and then like the Leap is going to consume that and deal like 120% in this case more damage. Onslaught, just like all the other default attack like replacers rather, are not going to be that great early on for leveling, but with items and with proper weapon damage they will scale pretty well, and endgame especially. I mean, Onslaught is a great skill to use alongside another like cooldown based ability. Next up we got one of the few transformations that we have in this game now. First off, the Werewolf, which deals by default pierce and bleeding damage with 2 abilities. So the Werewolf ability, sort of like both of the Were abilities, are permanent in Grim Dawn now by default. So yeah, you just transform into a wolf, and if you want to transform back, you just hit the same button again. You can basically do it all the time, right? It does cost mana though, that's like the only issue here, doing it like that. And then as a wolf, or as a raven as well, you can use any ability that is not a default attack or default attack replacer, meaning you cannot use Onslaught as a wolf or as a raven. However, you can of course use your Leap, or you can use like other abilities from, for example, in this case I'm a soldier second, so I could like use a Force Wave, or I could use a Blade Arc ability as well, right? Like these abilities work. By default though, the Werewolf gets the Feral Claws as well as the Rip and Tear skill. Like, he just has those by default, right? So Rip and Tear is a charge ability, kind of like a Fire Smite ability from Oathkeeper, which applies like pierce and bleeding damage. And also Feral Claws is kind of like a, well, it looks like a default attack. It is not a default attack though. It's more like a double swiping Blade Arc maybe. But I mean, Blade Arc is a little bit different, as you can tell. So yeah, the werewolf obviously can be used as, first of all, a kind of like a main ability itself. Like you can use Feral Claws and Rip and Tear as your main abilities. Which one you focus more on depends on like what you want to play and like your playstyle and so on, or like your gear or your class combinations. And you can also play the Chaos Werewolf, right? You can convert your piercing damage to Chaos. In this case, I am playing a Chaos, like this is a Chaos Werewolf. The pierce one looks a bit different, and then with items you can have even other variants like cold or fire or acid and so on. There's like lots of variation here via itemization later on. The second ability gives you crit damage and leech for your Feral Claws, which is pretty nice. And the third ability gives you DA Shred, which is going to be applied to every single skill that has % weapon damage. And since your Feral Claws and your Rip and Tear do have weapon damage, it will be applied by the werewolf's default attacks. But if you were using like Blade Arc as well, then it would also be applied by Blade Arc. And then also we have this chance on crit to reduce the cooldown of Rip and Tear by 1 second. So whenever you do crit with any attack, honestly, that's like the crazy thing here, your cooldown of Rip and Tear can be reduced. So you can zoom around a lot as a werewolf if you, well, build around that. The other way to play a werewolf would be to just use the werewolf kind of like as a like a buff, I guess, by, you know, there's no longer any like % chaos or something like that damage in here, but you can use it still like to, you can like 1 point the werewolf itself, like 1 point here, and then like max out recklessness to get like a DA Shred on enemies. And yeah, also you can combine that with Form of the Beasts later on, which will give you like total damage and more casting attack speed while in a were form. So you can kind of like use these were forms also as just like kind of buffs to other skills, even though you're not like actually playing the wolf skills. The second were ability, since we're like talking about were abilities already, is the Were Raven. Let me show you that one as well real quick. So the Were Raven has the same like way of transforming or transforming back. You can do it at any time now. And there's a Cold Pierce variant, which is the default one, which has these Ice Talons as well as the Cold Snap ability. Ice Talons is like a ranged, or like medium ranged rather, like avalanche like ability, I would dare to say. And then the other ability, the Cold Snap, is pretty good too. It's kind of like an AoE burst with a cooldown, kind of like an OFF, but it's actually good, like an Electra's Flash Freeze from the Arcanist. But it works against like everything, will damage everything, including bosses. Then the second node, Glacial Talons, just makes your Ice Talons stronger. And the third node, Everwinter, does give you like % Pierce, Cold, and Chaos and Frostburn buff. And also on attack, it will give you a chance to reduce the cooldown of your Cold Snap, so like of this AoE ability, by 0.6 seconds. And if you put more, I mean, it's gonna like reduce more and give a higher chance of reducing and so on. So the Raven, just like the Werewolf, can be played as a either like main ability, as the like the skills of the Raven themselves being the main abilities, Ice Talons and Cold Snap, or it can be used as a buff for other skills. I feel like the Rare Raven is probably going to be used as a buff for other skills more so, because it does have like some % damage in here, at least for Pierce, Cold, Chaos, and Frostburn. But with itemization though, I mean, it might depend a bit more, right? And also the Raven can be transformed to Chaos, so you can play a Chaos Raven as well, which looks pretty darn dope as well. And of course there's going to be other variants of this Raven as well via itemization. And once again, the Form of the Beast passive will apply to the Were Raven, like to all of your damage while you're in a Were Raven, just like the one for the Werewolf. There's pretty much 2 more main abilities. Yes, 2 more. There is Leap. So Leap is obviously just the jump. Probably almost every Berserker is going to at least 1 point to this, just for mobility. However, with proper itemization, you can make bleed, I mean, you can make leap rather, your main ability as well. Be it bleed leap or just like physical or whatever bleed damage type, rather leap is up to you, or like up to your itemization or up to your class combinations and so on. But yeah, leap is another main ability that you can use properly if you build around it properly. It won't be as great for leveling by default, it will require some more items than some of the other skills here. Last but not least, we have the Fangs of Asterkarn, which is a channeling AoE ability. So you have to stand still to cast this, and the faster you cast, like the more casting speed you have, the more often it will tick, but also the faster it will expand to its maximum size. So casting speed is going to be really good for this ability, as it's going to like work for, you know, both expanding the circle as well as for DPS, which is great. This ability is great for leveling, and if you use proper itemization on top of that later on, it's going to be good for pretty much all phases of the game. The only thing that like you might not like about this is like that you have to stand still and just like a bit like slow channeling, but the damage is good enough to compensate for that, I would dare to say. So it's a pretty good like leveling ability. Next up, I should probably talk about the passives up here in the first row, and also not just passives but also weapon pool skills. Now weapon pool skills are, as you know already at this point if you watched the rest of the video already, able to proc from default attacks, so Blood Fangs and Avalanche, right? If I use Onslaught here, you will see, yeah, the double swing with the red waves is the Blood Fangs ability. Yeah, and this one is the Avalanche proc, the Ice proc here. Depending on itemization, both of these can be great combined with Onslaught or any other default attack replacer as well. You can choose whatever you play here. Implements of War is a passive that allows you to dual wield both ranged or melee weapons, but not one of each, either 2 melee or 2 ranged. And as long as you're dual wielding, you also get the like passive buffs here. So now that I'm using a two-hander, I do not actually get the passive buffs here. I do not get the bleeding damage or the chance to not consume Onslaught. Other passives down here are Battle Surge, which is a really great like passive to just like heal yourself as a heal over time, and also gives you energy. And then Rage is like more like a circuit breaker. And what else do we have? We have 3 more two exclusives. We have Heart of Asterkarn with cold damage, like a just pure like cold focused yeah, exclusive, which does give you flat weapon damage, cold as well. And Bloodborne with bleeding damage, weapon based bleeding damage, crit damage, and then % pierce chaos bleeding. And kind of nice is the healing effect increase, to be fair. Healing effect increase works on lifesteal, active heals, as well as heal over time, so the heal from Battle Surge will also be buffed by Bloodborne. 2 more things to talk about here. Rallying Cry is an active press, like an active button to press, but it's more like a buff aura. The healing part, the restoring 30% HP part, will only happen when you press the button to yourself and all allies in your vicinity. I think it has a, 12 meter radius, yeah. And the OA and movement speed is going to be a buff that lasts for 60 seconds. So ideally it's permanent, because at least after 60 seconds you should be like reapplying the skill. Impulse basically just adds more buffs, like more permanent buffs to Rallying Cry. In this case, crit damage, maximum movement speed, trapped duration reduction, so like basically trap resistance, as well as slow resistance. Bone Chilling Cry is your main debuff ability, or like the only debuff ability that Berserker has. This reduces defensive ability, piercing, cold, chaos, and bleeding resistances in a 10 meter radius around you at least the soft cap at 12 of 12 points. It will probably have a smaller radius at lower points and a bigger at even more points, with of course the resistance reduction also scaling with level, and this is how it looks like. And as long as the enemy have like this debuff on them, like this icon, and you can also see like up here under the health bar, you see the icon refreshing as well. You can use either this icon here or check out the health bar of the enemy, like the icon below the health bar, to track whether or not your debuff is still applied to the enemy. Alright, with Berserker, that must have been all the masteries. So thank you so much already for watching this video. come back, feel free to come back for my next video, which is going to be about the devotions. So I'm going to talk about how to, like, first of all, like what the devotions are, and then like how to spec your devotions depending on which build you're playing.